before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I never thought Arizona would change me. Not like that. You go into the desert expecting heat, dust, the kind of dry silence that cracks around your ears like a whisper that forgot how to speak. But it's the quiet that gets you. Too complete, too heavy. It presses down on you until your thoughts echo back at you like voices from behind a wall. It was early spring when I packed up the RV and headed south. My name's Sean, 45, former firefighter turned full-time RV traveler after a bad fall on the job left my left leg 2 inches shorter and my nights full of limping dreams. I'd been on the road for almost a year, chasing blue skies and national parks, that vague American promise of freedom and fresh air. People think it's a retirement fantasy. What they don't realize is that a man can be running just as fast when he's standing still. I was tired of noise, city horns, sirens, voices I couldn't forget. So Arizona made sense. Big sky, big space, and I'd read about it, articles and YouTube videos titled Top 10 RV Campgrounds in Arizona, complete with drone footage and filtered sunsets. It looked peaceful. That kind of peace that makes you believe you'll find yourself out there. I started at Patagonia Lake, state park just south of Tucson. It was clean, quiet, the kind of place where the air smells like mesquite and the mornings come in slow like an old song. That first night, I parked near the water, brewed some coffee on the little camp stove, and watched the stars settle into the black like they'd been there forever. But even then, something felt off. Not wrong, just off, like a radio not quite tuned. I chalked it up to the altitude or the dry air messing with my head. But I didn't sleep well. Not because of sounds, but because of the lack of them. No crickets, no wind, not even a splash from the lake. I remember laying there, the hum of the RV's systems like a lullaby, and realizing that I hadn't seen another camper for hours, which wasn't totally weird, early season and all, but you'd expect at least one family with a dog or a fisherman working the shoreline. I shrugged it off. It was the next morning when the real strangeness began. I found tracks near my RV, bare feet. Human. Wide set, maybe size 11 or 12. But barefoot in the rocks and gravel, that didn't make sense. No blood, no torn skin, just smooth impressions like someone had walked calmly through the brush without minding the cactus or the sharp stone edges. They circled the RV once, just once. No prints going out, no prints coming in, just a circle. I didn't tell anyone, not that I had anyone to tell. And besides, I didn't want to seem paranoid. The desert plays tricks, right? Heat illusion, memory gaps. Maybe it was some old prints blown clear by the night wind, but wind doesn't make symmetrical, fresh outlines. I left Patagonia the next day, told myself I was just ready for something more remote, more beautiful, but I was already chasing silence with something else. An answer, maybe. Next stop was Lost Dutchman State Park, named after an old legend about gold buried deep in the Superstition Mountains. I like the myth. Something about men going mad for a treasure that may not exist hit close to home. I parked near the edge of the camp boundary, far enough from others to feel free, close enough to know I wasn't completely alone. That first night was peaceful. Sunset like a melted ember, coyotes calling out in long, ragged notes that made me feel less alone somehow. But I woke around 3 a.m. Something knocked, not at the door, on the side of the RV. 3 knocks, then silence. You know that feeling when you're suddenly awake, but your body hasn't caught up yet? Like your heart's already running, but your muscles haven't even tied their shoes? I laid there, frozen, breath caught behind my teeth. I waited for it again. Nothing. I sat up, opened the blind just a crack. No one. No prints in the dust, no breeze. But the smell, it hit me like a wave of heat. Coppery, wet, like rain on rusted metal mixed with sweat. A scent I hadn't smelled since the job. Since pulling a man out of a burned-out basement and realizing his blood was steaming in the cold. That morning, I drove into town and asked the ranger if there were any animal sightings. He gave me a weird look and said, "Plenty of coyotes. Sometimes bobcats? You see something?" I lied, said I thought I heard a deer snorting or something. He didn't press. But that night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the captain's chair, headlights pointed into the brush, a flashlight on the dash, and my old crowbar laid across my lap. Nothing happened. Nothing visible, anyway. But something was out there. Or maybe in here, in me. I started wondering if it was all just trauma, stress. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this solo stuff. But the thing about fear is once you let it in, it starts unpacking bags you didn't even know were in your soul, things you buried, things you never dealt with. Next campground was up in Oak Creek Canyon, Sedona area. More trees, more tourists, more noise. I thought that would help. I parked between two families. The sounds of kids laughing and someone burning bacon the next morning gave me a false sense of safety. Until the boy from the neighboring RV came to me crying. His name was Mason, maybe 6 years old. Dirt-smudged cheeks, eyes too wide for a child his age. He said, "There's a man with no face watching our camper at night." I froze. Asked him what he meant. He doesn't blink, and he makes this noise like... He paused and then made a dry, clicking sound in the back of his throat, like a locust, only slower. I walked him back to his parents. They brushed it off, said he was just having nightmares. But that night, I heard the clicking too, near the tree line. Slow, deliberate. I turned off the lights, sat there in the dark, listening, heart thumping so loud I couldn't tell if the sound was outside or inside my skull. Then, just before dawn, I saw it. A silhouette, tall, still, too still, no facial features, just the outline of a man where no man should be. I left at first light, didn't even make coffee, didn't say goodbye, and I drove all the way through the long spine of Route 89A until the landscape turned to high desert again. By the time I reached the outskirts of the Kaibab National Forest, I was unraveling. Not sleeping, not thinking straight, but something in me said, finish it. Like whatever I'd started wasn't done with me yet. I parked just off an old forest road, no cell signal, no other RVs, just juniper trees and silence like a stretched out shadow. I stayed 2 nights, and each night it got closer. The smell, the clicking, the sensation that I wasn't alone, even inside locked doors. The worst moment came the second night, just before sunrise. I stepped outside, needing air, and there it was. Not a figure, not a face, but a feeling, like I was being mirrored. As if something in the brush was copying my breathing, my posture, even my heartbeat, only a half second behind, like it was trying to remember how to be me. And in that moment, I understood something no YouTube video or campground guide will ever tell you. Some places don't want you. They watch. They wait. And if you're not careful, they'll find something hollow in you and fill it. I didn't pack up immediately, not because I wasn't terrified. I was. But because the worst kind of fear is the kind that numbs you, the kind that makes your hands feel foreign, your own breath unfamiliar. I stood there, barefoot in the cold morning dirt, and realized I hadn't moved in minutes. Just stood listening, trying to separate what was mine from what wasn't. When I finally turned to go back inside the RV, I caught something in my periphery, a shift, like a shadow straightening. But when I looked directly, nothing. Still trees, still silence. Still wrong. I locked the door behind me and sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet under the sink. I didn't know what to do. I was a grown man, a former first responder. I'd been through house fires, collapsed roofs, traffic wrecks soaked in diesel and blood, but nothing had ever made me feel invaded like this. Because it wasn't just something outside, it was something inside. Inside the air. Inside the land. Inside me. When I finally left Kaibab, I didn't head for another campground. I drove until the gas light came on, found the first decent gas station on the edge of Flagstaff, and parked in the back lot like I was just another overnight traveler. But I wasn't the same. And I knew something had followed me. I don't mean physically. I didn't see that shadow again. No more clicking, no more footprints. But it was in me now. That silence, that knowing, that deep crawling sense that there are places in this country, dark corners beneath beautiful skies that don't care about your logic, your plans, your roadmaps. Places that watch you the way a storm watches a single tree before it splits it down the middle. You ever hear people say, the desert heals? That it's spiritual? They're not wrong. But healing isn't always gentle. Sometimes heals something out of you that you didn't even know was killing you. Sometimes it shows you what's hollow and forces you to look. I went back home after that, parked the RV in my brother's driveway and told him I just needed a break. But I didn't tell him everything. Didn't tell him about the barefoot prints, or the boy with the clicking sound, or the shadow in the trees that breathed when I breathed. because I knew he'd look at me with those worried eyes, those eyes that say, "You need help." But what kind of help do you get for something you can't explain? I stayed off the road for 6 months, worked a part-time gig at an auto shop, kept things simple, slept with the lights on. And then one night, just as I started to feel normal again, I had the dream. I was back at that spot in Kaibab, back in the early morning mist, and I could hear my own voice, calling out from the trees, but I wasn't saying my name. I was copying myself, repeating like an echo that forgot how to fade. And when I woke up, heart pounding, mouth dry, I realized something. That place wasn't finished with me, and maybe I wasn't finished with it either. Maybe the desert doesn't let go until it's stripped you clean. Maybe it waits until it sees who you really are. And maybe that's why people disappear in places like that. Not because they're taken, but because they see themselves for the first time and can't go back. I did go back a year later, not to the same spots, not exactly. But I returned to Arizona with more than maps and route plans. I came back with respect. Real respect. Not the kind you give to park rangers or leave no trace signs. The kind you offer the land itself. The kind of reverence you feel when you understand that this ground doesn't owe you anything. That it's older than your fear and deeper than your courage. I parked at a small free campsite just outside of Safford. BLM land. Quiet. Windy. First night was clear. Stars like broken glass scattered across a velvet sky. I made a small fire, just enough to feel human. The heat on my hands reminded me I was still here. Then, out in the brush, movement. Not fast, not threatening, just deliberate. And I didn't panic. I didn't grab a weapon. I didn't even stand. I just sat there, watching, listening. And in that silence, I heard it again, breathing. But it didn't match mine. It didn't try to mimic this time. It just waited. I whispered into the fire, said, "I see you." And I swear on everything I've got left that the wind stopped. Just for a second. Like it was listening. And then it passed. No footsteps, no sound, no clicking, just presence and absence. All at once. The next morning there were no prints, no signs of animals, just a single stone set upright next to my tire, not placed, pressed into the dirt. The shape of it made no sense, flat on one side, smooth on the other, like it had been polished by a hand that knew exactly how to hold it. I took it with me, not as a souvenir, as a reminder. You see, the best RV camping spots in Arizona aren't in the brochures. They're not in the drone footage or the top 10 lists or the polished YouTube vlogs that only show sunsets and s'mores. The best spots are the ones that see you back, the ones that test you, the ones that force you to choose comfort or truth. I've met a lot of RVers since then, families, loners, retirees chasing their second youth. And every now and then, one of them will talk about a night they can't quite explain. A sound they don't have words for. A stretch of road that feels longer on the way out than on the way in. I just nod. And I tell them, Arizona doesn't forget. Because it doesn't. Not if you've stood in its silence and felt it look through you. Not if you've learned that fear isn't something to escape, but something to understand. You go into the desert thinking you'll find peace, but what you really find is yourself. Stripped bare, shadowed, silent, and somehow still standing. That's the truth about these places, and the truth about RV camping in it's not about comfort, it's about coming back alive, even if you didn't know you were lost to begin with. And the mist rolled in quicker than I'd expected, but I didn't mind. I loved the fog, loved the way it muted everything, softened the edges of the world, made it all feel a little more mysterious. It was perfect for my project. Whispers of the Wild was going to be my best work yet. I could feel it after everything I'd been through in the past year. Hell, in the past month. This was the reset I needed. Just me, my camera, and the Smoky Mountains. No one to answer to. No one to lean on. Just the way I liked it. I hefted my backpack higher on my shoulders and adjusted my camera strap. The trail was rough, more overgrown than I'd expected, but that was part of the draw. The more remote the location, the better the shot. No tourists ruining the landscape with their neon jackets or loud conversations, just untouched wilderness. But untouched wilderness had its downsides. My camera had been acting up since I'd arrived. I'd missed some great shots because of it. Fog rolling over the peaks, a hawk perched on a branch just feet away. But I told myself I didn't care. This trip wasn't about getting everything right. It was about getting away. I paused to catch my breath and set the camera down on a fallen log. The lens fogged up almost instantly in the damp air, and when I wiped it off with the corner of my jacket, I realized I'd smeared dirt across it. Typical. "Come on," I muttered, digging into my bag for a lens cloth. As I crouched there, rubbing at the stubborn streak of mud, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was a woodpecker. There were plenty of them around these parts, but it didn't sound right. Too slow, too steady. Tap, pause, tap, pause. I looked up, but the fog was thickening, swallowing the trees just a few yards ahead of me. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was just a branch knocking against a tree in the wind. I wasn't scared of being out here alone. In fact, I preferred it. No one to distract me, no one to get in my head. Still, the silence that followed felt too quiet, like something was waiting. I shoved the lens cloth back into my pack and stood up, forcing myself to move on. A campsite to reach before dark, and I wasn't about to get spooked by a weird noise, at least not this early in the trip. The fog never really lifted by the time I reached the clearing where I planned to camp. It was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. I set up my tent quickly, more out of habit than anything else, though I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I wasn't sure why. There was no one around, no animals scurrying through the underbrush, not even a bird call to break the stillness. I figured a good night's sleep would shake off the nerves. I was just tired. The last few months had been brutal. Breaking up with Paul, the constant fights before it, the way he made me feel like I couldn't do anything right. This trip was supposed to be my way of proving him wrong, proving to myself that I didn't need him, that I didn't need anyone. But the anxiety crept up on me anyway, a tight knot in my chest as I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the ceiling of my tent. Then there was that tapping again, faint and far off. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, just the wind, just the forest. But then it stopped abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch. And I heard something else, something worse. A whisper. It was so faint I could barely make it out, but it was there, threading through the fog outside. It didn't sound like words, not exactly, but it was too rhythmic to be wind, too deliberate. I sat up, listening hard, my heart racing. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it through the thin walls of the tent. Just mist and shadows. The whispering stopped, but the silence that followed felt alive, thick with something I couldn't name. I switched off the light, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I packed up quickly. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I just wanted to get moving. The fog had lifted slightly, but the forest felt wrong somehow, like it was holding its breath. I didn't like it. I wanted to get to higher ground, get some better shots, and move on. By midday, I'd made it to a rocky ridge that overlooked a valley. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of shot I'd come for. The fog clung to the trees below, creating a sea of white with the mountain peaks poking through like islands. I snapped a few photos, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. When I reviewed the pictures on my camera, my breath caught in my throat. There were figures in the fog. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, just shadows cast by the trees. But the more I zoomed in, the clearer they became. Tall, thin shapes, barely visible but definitely there, human or something like it, standing motionless among the trees, watching me. I whipped my head around, scanning the valley below. There was no one, just mist and trees. But in the photos, the figures were there. I lowered the camera, heart pounding. I hadn't imagined it, I couldn't have. And yet, the air around me felt suddenly cold. Not the kind of cold that comes with a change in the weather. This was different, deeper, like it had seeped into my bones. I should have left right then, packed up, and headed back to the main trail. But I didn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was keeping me here, pulling me deeper into the wilderness. That night, I camped by a small stream. I hadn't seen any more figures, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. I felt like I was being watched constantly. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I built a fire, more for comfort than warmth, and tried to distract myself by reviewing the day's photos. That's when I noticed something else. The figures in the fog weren't in just one picture. They were in all of them. Some barely visible, others clearer, standing in groups or alone. Always watching, always there. My hands started shaking, and I nearly dropped the camera. It was impossible. I'd been out there for hours and I hadn't seen anyone. Not a single hiker, no animals, no birds, but there they were in every shot. Suddenly the whispering started again. It was louder this time, closer. I stood up, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The beam of light cut through the mist, but I couldn't see anything. Still, the whispering grew louder, like it was circling me, coming from all directions at once. "You shouldn't be here." That's what it sounded like, a woman's voice, soft but firm, blending with the rustling leaves and flowing water. It wasn't clear, not exactly, but the meaning was clear. I wasn't welcome. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest, and backed toward the tent. The whispering followed me, growing sharper, angrier. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief second I saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees, tall and thin, dressed in old, ragged clothes. Her face was pale, hollow-eyed, and filled with sorrow. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. The flashlight flickered back to life, and the whispering stopped. I didn't sleep that night. By the time dawn broke, I knew I had to leave. This wasn't some trick of the mind. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, there was something in these woods, something angry, and I had trespassed. I packed up my gear in record time and set off toward the trailhead. But the forest seemed different now, like the trees were closing in on me. The path I'd taken to get here was gone, swallowed by the fog. My compass spun wildly, useless, and the map was no help in the unmarked wilderness. Panic gnawed at my insides as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to keep my bearings. But the more I walked, the more lost I became. And all the while, I could feel her watching, waiting. The whispering started again as I crossed a small clearing, louder this time, angrier. I dropped my pack, desperate, and spun around. There she was, standing in the mist, her eyes locked on mine. I fell to my knees, breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though my voice was barely audible over the growing wind. "I didn't mean to." Her expression softened just slightly, and for the first time I felt something other than fear. She wasn't just angry, she was in pain. "I'm sorry," I repeated, louder this time. "I shouldn't be here. I didn't know." The wind died down, the whispering faded, and slowly the figure in the mist began to dissolve, melting back into the fog. I sat there for what felt like hours, heart racing, too afraid to move. But she was gone. The air felt lighter, the forest less oppressive. When I finally stood, I saw it, small, barely visible in the fog, a stone hidden among the trees, a grave, long forgotten, buried deep in the wilderness. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get close. I just stood there for a moment, paying my respects to the spirit I'd disturbed. Then, without looking back, I turned and walked away. I made it out of the Smokies that day, but the images, the figures in the fog, the woman's sorrowful eyes followed me. I never published the photos from that trip. Some things I realized weren't meant to be captured. Some things were meant to be left alone. My name is Zinnia Walker, and in 2007 I found myself in the Cascade-Siskiyou National Monument in southern Oregon. It wasn't a planned getaway. I was running from a messy breakup and an even messier financial situation. Camping seemed like a cheap solution. With a borrowed tent, a Costco multi-pack of trail mix, and no real survival skills, I figured I'd channel my inner rugged individualist. Spoiler alert, I am not that guy. The morning was uneventful. I hiked a couple of easy trails, marveling at the towering Douglas firs and the strange quiet of the forest. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the sort that made your skin crawl, like when someone stares at you for too long. Still, I pressed on. The campsite was isolated. Just me and a rented Ford Focus parked a mile down a gravel road. Not another soul in sight. Around midday, I decided to explore a narrow, unmarked trail I'd spotted earlier. It wound down into a ravine, the air growing cooler and the sunlight dimming as the canopy thickened overhead. About 30 minutes in, I came across a clearing with what I first thought was an old fire pit. It was a circle of blackened stones, but they weren't charred from fire. They were slick, as if oozing some kind of residue. Surrounding the stones were odd carved sticks planted upright in the ground. It looked like some avant-garde art installation, or maybe a sacrificial site for someone who worshipped the forest itself. I muttered something about hippies and turned back the way I'd come. Only after walking for what felt like 20 minutes, I ended up back at the clearing. At first, I thought it was déjà vu. Then I noticed the trail I'd left was gone, just dense trees where the path had been. My stomach sank as I realized I was lost. And worse, there was no cell signal. I decided to keep moving. With no landmarks and the sun sliding lower in the sky, panic began to creep in. That's when I heard it, a sound like wet leaves being dragged across gravel. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I stopped, straining to hear, and there it was again, now accompanied by a faint clicking. Not like an animal's claws, sharper, almost metallic. My first thought, coyotes. But coyotes don't sound like that. I picked up the pace, half jogging and trying to quiet the crunch of dead foliage beneath my boots. Every few minutes, I'd hear that dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the forest. It seemed to echo, making it impossible to tell which direction it came from. Then the clicking started again, closer this time, almost rhythmic, like a macabre metronome. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled into another clearing. Relief washed over me when I spotted a crumbling wooden cabin in the center, half swallowed by moss and vines. It looked ancient, as if it had been abandoned for decades. My gut screamed bad idea, but desperation overruled common sense. I bolted for the cabin, ducking through the rotted doorway and slamming what was left of the door behind me. Inside, the air was thick with mildew, and the floor sagged under my weight. The room was empty except for a rusted stove and a wooden table that leaned at a dangerous angle. There were no windows, just the door I'd come through and a small crawl space that looked like it led to a root cellar. I didn't have time to consider my poor life choices, because that sound, dragging, clicking, was now right outside. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed myself against the wall, clutching a branch I'd picked up earlier. Through the gaps in the rotted wood, I glimpsed movement, a shadow, elongated and grotesque, skittering unnaturally fast past the doorway. The creature entered the cabin before I could react. It was like something out of a nightmare, a hunched, skeletal frame covered in mottled gray skin, stretched taut over bone. Its limbs were long, almost insect-like, ending in jagged, blade-like appendages that scraped the floor with every step. Its head, if you could call it that, was flat and featureless, except for a wide, lipless mouth filled with crooked, serrated teeth. I froze, praying it hadn't seen me. Then it sniffed the air. No nose, just two gaping holes where one should have been, and turned directly toward me. There was no doubt now. It knew I was there. I swung the branch as it lunged forward, the impact doing little more than startling it. It let out a shrill, bone-rattling screech that reverberated through the cabin. I ducked as it swiped at me with one of its bladed limbs, splintering the wall behind me. My options were rapidly dwindling. Spotting the crawl space, I dove for it, narrowly avoiding another strike. The wood beneath me gave way, and I tumbled into the cellar, landing in a heap of dirt and old rotted planks. Above me, the creature slashed at the floor, its claws punching through like jagged spears. I scrambled backward, searching frantically for anything resembling a weapon. My hand closed around a rusted metal pipe, its surface crusted with who knows what. The creature forced its way through the opening, landing with a sickening thud. In the dim light, it was even more horrifying up close. Its limbs moved with an unnatural fluidity, and the smell of decay radiated from its body, choking the air. I swung the pipe as hard as I could, catching it across what I assumed was its torso. The impact elicited a gurgling hiss, but it barely staggered. Desperate, I spotted a jagged shard of wood from the broken planks. As the creature lunged again, I drove the shard upward with every ounce of strength I had. It pierced the creature's chest, sinking deep into its gray flesh. The thing let out a guttural wail, deafening and primal, before collapsing into a twitching heap. I didn't wait to see if it was dead for good. I clawed my way out of the cellar, stumbling back into the forest. My legs burned, and every breath felt like swallowing fire. But I didn't stop until I reached the gravel road where my car was parked. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the world in murky twilight. Then I saw them. 3 more of those things standing at the edge of the forest, their silhouettes barely visible against the trees. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, as if daring me to come back. I didn't need another invitation to leave. I floored it, kicking up gravel as I sped down the road. Later, I told the local sheriff about what happened. They found the clearing and the cabin, but no bodies. Just deep gouges in the wood and those strange carved sticks surrounding the blackened stones. The sheriff shrugged it off as a bear attack, though I noticed he avoided looking me in the eye when he said it. I moved to the city a week later. Sometimes, though, I wonder, how many more of those things are out there? Carving sticks, dragging their prey through the forest. One thing's for sure, I'm sticking to city parks from now on. At least there, the worst thing lurking around is someone trying to sell you overpriced artisanal hot dogs. The road wound through the dense trees, snaking deeper into the heart of the low national forest. The thick canopy above allowed only sparse sunlight to filter through, casting shadows across the narrow dirt road. I gripped the steering wheel of my RV, trying to shake off the gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. It had been 3 hours since I'd passed another vehicle. Solitude was the whole point, wasn't it? This trip was supposed to help me clear my head, to reconnect with myself after the divorce. I had spent the last few months in a fog, and this trip to Deadwood Creek was meant to be my escape, a test of independence. No ex-husband, no stress, just me in the wilderness. I needed this. At least, that's what I'd been telling myself for the past 2 weeks. Deadwood Creek Campground wasn't listed on any mainstream maps, just a blip on an obscure site for hardcore campers who sought isolation. The campground had a reputation, but that was part of the appeal. I needed remote quiet, far away from anything that reminded me of what I'd left behind. But as I pulled into the clearing, past the sign half buried in moss that read Deadwood Creek, a shiver ran through me. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you second-guess your decision to be alone. I parked the RV near a small, trickling creek. The only other vehicle was an old, beat-up camper a short distance away, nestled under the towering pines. It was empty, no sign of movement, no campfire. Good. I wasn't in the mood for socializing. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air and surveyed the site. The woods were thick, ancient. The ground was littered with pine needles, muffling the sound of my footsteps, a perfect retreat. I set up camp, unfolding my chair and setting my mug of tea beside me as I sat by the creek, listening to the soft gurgle of the water. It was peaceful, just as I'd hoped. But after a while, the peace felt off. Too still. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, and the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was oppressive. My mind wandered back to the stories I'd read online, the rumors about Deadwood Creek's dark history. This used to be a mining settlement during the gold rush, or so the tale went. Dozens of men had come to find their fortunes, but most found only death, mysterious disappearances, bodies never recovered. Some say the men still haunt the place, bound to the land, working their endless shifts beneath the earth. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to local folklore meant to spook tourists. But now, sitting alone in the fading light, the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The wind rustled the trees and I jumped at the sound. Get it together, Hannah, I thought, rolling my eyes at my own nerves. I hadn't come all this way just to scare myself into leaving. That's when I saw him, a man standing near the edge of the campground, just at the tree line, leaning against a tree. He was tall with broad shoulders and a scruffy beard, his clothes worn and dirty as if he'd been out here for weeks. His gaze was fixed on me. I waved awkwardly, and he lifted a hand in response before slowly walking over. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said, his voice easy, almost too casual. "Didn't expect anyone else out here this late in the season." "I wasn't expecting anyone either," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just needed some time alone, you know?" "Yeah, I get that," he chuckled, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Rick, by the way. Been coming here for years." I nodded, unsure what to say. Rick had the look of someone who belonged out here, who knew the woods like the back of his hand. I didn't. "Be careful out here," Rick said after a pause, his gaze drifting toward the woods. "Deadwood Creek's got a history. Strange things happen when the sun goes down." My skin prickled at his words, but I forced myself to laugh. "Let me guess, ghost stories? Miners and all that?" Rick's expression didn't change. "Something like that. Just don't stray too far from your camp." He turned and walked back to his camper without another word, leaving me with a knot of unease in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The RV was quiet, the temperature inside dropping faster than I expected. I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Then the sound started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but soon I realized it was more than that. Faint at first, barely perceptible. A rhythmic clinking echoed from the direction of the creek. It sounded like tools, mining tools, pickaxes striking rock. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. No, I was just imagining it. This was what I came here for, solitude, but I couldn't shake the sound. It was getting louder, the metallic rhythm persistent, almost like a heartbeat. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed out of the RV, my breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was a wall of darkness, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The sound of the creek was louder now, rushing over rocks, and I could swear I heard voices, whispers carried on the wind. My flashlight beam swept across the campsite, catching nothing but trees and the faint shimmer of water. But then I saw them. Figures, shadowy, half-formed shapes moving by the creek, their outlines faint but unmistakably human. They moved like they were working, digging, swinging pickaxes in time with the clinking sound. My throat tightened as I realized they weren't there in the normal sense. They were translucent, faded. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Ghosts? No, that was impossible. I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing, but as I turned, I nearly collided with Rick. Easy, he said, raising his hands. I saw your light. Thought I'd come check on you. I couldn't find the words to explain what I'd just seen, but Rick didn't need me to. He just looked over at the creek and nodded, his face unreadable. They come out at night, the miners. Been here for over a century, trapped in their own hell. I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic. You mean you know about this? What is this place? Rick gave a half smile, though it was more sad than comforting. Deadwood Creek. These men came here to find gold, but all they found was death. Now they're stuck here, working the land forever. Some nights, they're just echoes. Other nights? He trailed off, but the implication was clear. On other nights, they weren't just echoes. My name is Yara Fisher. I'm 21 years old, and I make a living traveling solo across the country in my camper van, documenting off-the-grid destinations for my blog. What happened to Mimi in Ocala National Forest wasn't a story I wanted to write, but I have to. I don't know if I got out. I arrived at Ocala National Forest late in the afternoon after a long drive through back roads and pine forests. It was my first time here, though I'd read about the area. People talked about disappearances, strange voices in the woods. I thought it was all folklore, the kind of thing locals tell to keep kids from wandering off. I found a clearing near a small lake and parked my van. It was perfect, isolated, quiet. Just me, my camera, and a few days of peace. The first sign that something was wrong happened within an hour. I was setting up my tripod near the van when I checked my phone for the time, 5:15 p.m. When I glanced again, it was 8:45. I felt like I had blinked. I hadn't eaten, hadn't moved from my spot. The sun was still setting, but somehow 3 hours were gone. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe my phone had glitched. That night, as I was lying in bed inside the van, I heard something outside. A knock. Soft. Deliberate. I sat up, heart hammering. I listened. Knock. Knock. I reached for my phone. No signal. I took a deep breath and peered out the window. Nothing. Just the dark outline of the trees unmoving in the still air. Then I saw them. Footprints. Bare, human footprints in the dirt, circling my van. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. I checked my camera, flipping through the photos I had taken the day before. Then I stopped. There were pictures I didn't remember taking. Blurry shots of my van, my own shadow stretching across the dirt. One of my bed taken from inside the van. My stomach twisted. I had locked the doors. No one else was here. I told myself there was a rational explanation. Maybe I had set the camera on a timer. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe. That afternoon I went hiking. The forest was dense, the air thick with humidity. I stopped to take a few shots of the moss-draped trees when I noticed something up ahead. A person. A woman. Wearing my clothes. I froze. She was walking through the trees. Same dark green jacket, same jeans, same brown hiking boots. Hey! I called out. She stopped, turned. I couldn't see her face, just a blank, featureless void where it should have been. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my camera. When I looked again, she was gone. I ran back to the van. I locked the doors. I pulled the curtains shut. That night, my reflection started acting strange. At first, it was subtle, a delay, a flicker. I turned my head, and for a split second, the reflection didn't. Then it smiled. I didn't. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. I took a selfie just to be sure. When I checked the screen, the photo showed two of me, one standing behind me, watching. I threw my phone across the van and curled up under the blankets, forcing my eyes shut. In the silence, I heard something outside. My own voice. "Claire, let me in." I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. "Claire, I'm cold." I squeezed my eyes shut. The voice grew fainter, further away. Then, just before dawn, a text message from my own number. "Let me in." I packed up at first light. The van wouldn't start. The engine, the battery, everything was fine. It just wouldn't turn over, like the forest had made up its mind. I wasn't leaving. I ran. I grabbed my pack and bolted down the dirt road, my breath coming fast and ragged. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to move. Then I saw her. Ahead of me, she was standing in the middle of the road, waiting. She was me. Same clothes, same face, same eyes. She smiled, and I felt it, like something inside me was pulling, unraveling, like she was taking something I didn't know I was losing. I turned and ran the other way. The road looped. I ended up right back at my van. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking. The sun was setting again, and I was afraid to close my eyes. That was when I saw the notebook, mine, lying open on the dashboard. The pages were filled with my handwriting, but I hadn't written them. They weren't words, just one sentence over and over. "I am MCLA." My hands went numb. I heard the knocking again, soft, gentle, a whisper, right against the door. "It's okay now. You can let go." I clenched my teeth, shook my head. The whisper became a laugh, a soft, breathy giggle, like she knew something I didn't. The world went black. When I woke up, I was outside, lying in the dirt, barefoot. My footprints led back to the van, but I didn't remember walking. I got up slowly, my head pounding. Something felt wrong. I checked my reflection in the van's side mirror. It moved a second too late, and it was still smiling. I don't remember how I got out. I must have walked. A trucker found me on the side of the road, dazed, covered in dirt. I told him I was lost, that my van had broken down. He drove me to the nearest town. I never went back. But sometimes when I take a picture, I see something in the background. A shadow, a figure, a woman wearing my clothes, smiling. I've always found that the desert has a way of clearing the mind. Vast stretches of nothingness can do wonders for perspective. Back in 2019, I was on assignment in the Sahara near the Algerian border. My name is Kelly Miller, and after 11 years as a Green Beret, I thought I'd seen just about everything. Our mission was straightforward: locate and secure a missing UN convoy that had vanished without a trace. I was teamed up with 3 others: Daniel Ortiz, a guy who could fix anything with a motor; Ahmed Elad, our local guide with a knack for navigating sandstorms; and Lisa Chin, the sharpest analyst I'd ever met, who had a habit of cracking one-liners at the worst possible times. As we set out across the dunes in our rugged jeeps, the sun beat down like it was trying to make a point. Ahmed was at the wheel, humming a tune I didn't recognize. "What's that song?" I asked. "Just something my grandfather used to sing," he replied with a grin, "supposed to ward off evil spirits." "Well, keep singing," Lisa chimed in. "Can't hurt, right?" Daniel smirked. "If it keeps the sand out of the engine, I'm all for it." We drove for hours, the GPS flickering intermittently as if unsure of itself. The desert can mess with your instruments, but this felt different, erratic. "Equipment's acting up," Lisa noted, tapping the screen. "Maybe it's the evil spirits," Daniel joked. "Very funny," Ahmed said, though his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. As dusk approached, we stumbled upon the remnants of the convoy. Trucks were overturned, supplies scattered, and there was no sign of the personnel. "This doesn't look like an ambush," I observed. "No bullet holes," Lisa agreed. "No shell casings either." Daniel knelt beside one of the trucks. Engines still warm. Whatever happened, it was recent. Ahmed scanned the horizon. "We should be careful. The desert has its secrets." "Great, more secrets," Lisa muttered. "Just what we need." We split up to search the area. I headed toward a nearby rock formation. Something about it seemed out of place in the otherwise flat landscape. As I approached, I noticed markings on the stone, scratches forming an almost deliberate pattern. "Hey, take a look at this," I called out. The others joined me. Ahmed's face went pale. "We should leave. Now." "What's wrong?" I asked. He hesitated. "These symbols, they're warnings in local folklore." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Warnings about what?" Before Ahmed could answer, a distant sound cut through the silence. A low, haunting howl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Desert wolves?" Lisa suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Not like any wolf I've heard," Daniel replied. Night was closing in fast, and the temperature began to drop. We decided to make camp, but agreed to keep a constant watch. Something didn't feel right. Around midnight, as I sat poking at the dying embers of our fire, I heard rustling from behind the rocks. "Who's there?" I demanded, standing up. No response. "Just the wind," I told myself. Then I saw it, a silhouette moving swiftly between the dunes. It was large, moving on all fours, but disturbingly fluid, almost graceful. I alerted the others. "We're not alone out here." Lisa grabbed her rifle. "Animal or human?" "Not sure," I admitted. Ahmed whispered something under his breath, clutching a small talisman around his neck. "Any chance your amulet can scare it off?" Daniel asked, only half joking. Ahmed didn't answer. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the night. It was coming from the direction of our vehicles. We raced over to find one of the UN drivers, whom we hadn't seen earlier, collapsing to the ground. Deep gashes crisscrossed his back, and his eyes were wide with terror. "Help me," he gasped. Lisa and I tried to administer first aid while Daniel and Ahmed stood guard. The man's wounds were severe, and despite our efforts, he slipped away within minutes. "What could have done this?" Lisa asked, her hands shaking. As if in response, the haunting howl echoed once more, closer this time. "We need to get out of here," Ahmed urged. "Agreed," I said, "but we're not leaving without answers." We decided to head back to the rock formation, thinking maybe there was a cave or shelter we could use. As we approached, the sand beneath our feet seemed to shift unnaturally. "Quicksand?" Daniel wondered aloud. "No, it's solid ground," Ahmed insisted. Just then, the creature emerged. A monstrous figure, like a hyena stretched to twice its normal size, with matted fur and a jaw that seemed to unhinge unnaturally. Its eyes reflected the moonlight, giving them an eerie glow. "Open fire," I ordered. We unloaded our weapons, but the creature was fast, darting between rocks and making itself a difficult target. It let out a guttural snarl, a sound that vibrated through the air and rattled my bones. "Circle around," I directed, trying to flank it. Daniel moved to the right, but the creature anticipated the maneuver. In a blur of motion, it lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. "Get off me!" Daniel shouted, struggling to fend it off. Lisa took aim and fired a precise shot that grazed the creature's side, causing it to recoil. Ahmed rushed in, pulling Daniel to safety. "Thanks," Daniel panted, his face pale. The creature paced around us, seemingly unfazed by the injury. "Any bright ideas?" Lisa asked, reloading her weapon. I recalled the few canisters we'd seen near the convoy wreckage. "We need to lead it back to the trucks." "You're thinking explosives?" Daniel guessed. "Exactly." We formed a loose formation, slowly retreating toward the convoy. The creature followed, its movements predatory but patient. As we reached the wreckage, I grabbed one of the fuel canisters and rigged it with a makeshift fuse using cloth and a flare. "Keep it distracted," I told the others. Ahmed shouted something in his native language, waving his arms. The creature turned its attention to him, snarling. "Hey, over here!" Daniel taunted. I lit the fuse and rolled the canister toward the creature. "Now!" We dove behind one of the overturned trucks just as the canister exploded. Flames erupted, illuminating the night and engulfing the creature. "Did we get it?" Lisa asked, peering over the edge. Through the flames, we saw the silhouette stumble and collapse. "Let's hope so," I said. Silence settled over the desert, interrupted only by the crackling of fire. "Well, that was a blast," Daniel quipped, attempting to lighten the mood. "Your jokes are as bad as your aim," Lisa retorted, though a faint smile crossed her lips. Ahmed remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the burning wreckage. "Think there are more of them?" I asked him. He shook his head slowly. "Legends speak of only one, a guardian of the sands, punishing those who trespass." "Great," Daniel sighed. "Next time, let's vacation in Iceland." As dawn broke, we gathered what supplies we could and prepared to head back. "What do we tell command?" Lisa wondered. I considered it. We report the loss of the convoy and the driver. Cause of death? Wildlife attack. That's one way to put it, Daniel agreed. Ahmed glanced at me. Some things are better left unsaid. I nodded. Let's keep this between us. We started the long drive back. The rising sun cast long shadows across the dunes. The radio crackled to life with static. And for once, it was a comforting sound. At least the equipment's working again, Lisa remarked. Silver linings, Daniel added. As we reached the outskirts of the desert, I took one last look at the endless sea of sand. What's on your mind? Ahmed asked. Just thinking. I might stick to forests from now on, I replied. He chuckled softly. Every place has its secrets. Yeah, but at least trees don't usually try to eat me. Depends on the forest, Lisa interjected. Remind me to tell you about the time I was in the Amazon. On second thought, maybe city life wasn't so bad. On second thought, maybe city life isn't so bad, Daniel mused. We drove on, the tension easing with each mile. The desert had tested us, but we made it out. Scarred but alive. Back at the base, debriefing was mercifully brief. The higher-ups seemed content with our report, attributing the losses to known hazards. As we parted ways, Daniel clapped me on the shoulder. Next mission, let's lobby for beachfront duty. Only if you promise not to attract any monsters, I shot back. No guarantees, he laughed. Lisa headed toward the comms room. I've got reports to file. Try not to get into trouble without me. Ahmed gave a small wave. Until next time. I watched them go, grateful for a team that could face the unexplainable and still crack a joke afterward. Maybe the desert wouldn't make my list of vacation spots, but at least I'd have an interesting story if I ever ran out of things to say at a dinner party. I never wanted to drive Loveland Pass again. I hadn't been back on that stretch of road since the night Marty died, the night his rig went over the edge and disappeared into the fog like it had never existed. The only thing they found was twisted metal at the bottom of the canyon. I told myself it wasn't my fault, but the guilt stuck to me like oil on a rag, refusing to wash off no matter how many miles I put between me and that place. But Pete called in a favor. He needed me, and I owed him more than I could count. A convoy job through the Rockies, 3 trucks hauling high-value cargo to a research facility in Colorado. It was big money, but more than that, it was for Pete. He convinced me with a laugh over the phone. Come on, Red, we need your experience out here. What could go wrong? I didn't laugh. Not this time. So there I was, back in the driver's seat of my rig, with Pete leading the convoy and another trucker, Jerry, bringing up the rear. The snow-capped peaks of the Rockies loomed ahead as we started our ascent through Loveland Pass. The winding road snaked around the mountains, a narrow, dangerous route where one wrong move could send you tumbling into nothingness. The memories hit hard as soon as we passed the first switchback, the same stretch where Marty had lost control. I gripped the wheel tighter, feeling the familiar weight of regret in my chest. I'd spent years avoiding convoys, always driving solo. The ghosts from that night hadn't let me forget, and now I was back, like I was inviting them to haunt me all over again. Red, you still with us? Pete's voice crackled over the CB, cutting through my thoughts. I pressed the mic. Yeah, still here. Roads are getting slick. We should take it slow. Pete agreed, and we settled into the grind, navigating the treacherous turns with caution. The sun had set hours ago, and now only the thin beams of our headlights cut through the growing darkness. The fog rolled in thick and fast, curling around the edges of the road like ghostly fingers. That's when I saw it up ahead. Just barely visible through the fog was a pair of headlights. They flickered like a dying flame, appearing and disappearing in the swirling mist. I squinted, leaning forward, trying to get a better look. It was a truck, no doubt about it. But there was something familiar about the way it moved, the way it hugged the curves of the road like it had been driving this route for years. I keyed the mic again. Pete, you see that truck up ahead? Silence. Then Pete's voice came through, confused. There's no truck, Red. Just us. I glanced in the mirror. Jerry's headlights were still behind me, steady and unchanging. But the truck in front, it wasn't one of ours. I let go of the mic, my gut tightening. Maybe it was a local driver, someone familiar with the area. But as I watched it more closely, I knew that wasn't right. The truck was old, real old, the kind of rig you didn't see much on the road anymore. And then it hit me, hard and fast. The paint job. The faded red stripe down the side. The same color as the one Marty had on his rig. My chest tightened. "No," I whispered, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. It couldn't be Marty's truck. It was gone. Destroyed, crumpled at the bottom of a canyon. But this was his rig. It had to be. The headlights flickered again, and then the truck was gone, swallowed by the fog like it had never been there. "Red, you good back there?" Pete's voice crackled through again. I didn't respond right away. My pulse was racing, my hands slick with sweat. I glanced around, looking for any sign of the truck, but the road was empty. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice shaky. "Just seeing things." But I wasn't seeing things, not this time. We kept moving, the road winding higher, the fog thickening. The curves grew sharper, and the guardrails seemed to disappear into the mist, making it feel like we were driving on the edge of the world. That's when the CB crackled again. But this time it wasn't Pete or Jerry's voice. "Red, you gotta help me." The voice was faint, distorted, but I recognized it immediately. My heart stopped. "Marty?" I whispered, disbelief creeping into my voice. The radio stayed silent for a moment, but then it came again, clearer this time, like the words were being dragged through the static. "Red, help me. I can't hold on." I dropped the mic. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Marty was dead. Gone. But that voice, it was his. Down to the rasp he always had when he called me Red. I hadn't heard it in years, and yet here it was, crackling through the radio like a ghost from the past. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself it was just some weird interference. But the road ahead seemed to twist and shift unnaturally, like the mountains themselves were trying to trap us in. I checked my mirrors again, half expecting to see the ghost truck reappear, but there was nothing, just the thick swirling fog. "Pete, something's not right," I said into the mic, trying to keep my voice steady. "We should stop. Let the fog clear." "Negative, Red. We've got a tight schedule. Keep moving." His response was sharp, almost panicked. Pete wasn't the type to scare easily, but I could hear the tension in his voice. He knew something was wrong too, but he didn't want to say it. The fog pressed in closer, and suddenly the road didn't feel familiar anymore. I'd driven this pass more times than I could count, but now it was like the route had changed. The turns were sharper, the drops steeper. I didn't know where we were headed anymore. And then I saw the truck again. It appeared out of the fog, closer this time, swerving wildly across the road. The old, rusted cab, the faded red stripe. It was Marty's rig, no doubt about it. But when I pulled alongside, there was no driver. The cab was empty, the windows fogged over from the inside. My stomach lurched. I slammed the brakes, swerving to avoid the ghost truck, but it vanished into the mist as quickly as it had come. My truck fishtailed, tires screeching against the wet pavement, but I managed to hold it steady. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Red, what the hell's going on back there?" Pete's voice snapped through the radio. "I saw him," I muttered, barely able to catch my breath. "I saw Marty's truck." Silence hung in the air for a long moment. I knew Pete was processing what I'd said, trying to figure out if I was losing it or if there was something more. But before he could respond, the CB crackled again. Marty didn't make it. It wasn't Pete, it wasn't Jerry, it was Marty. His voice filled the cab, clearer than before, as if he was sitting right next to me. "You let me go, Red. You let me fall." I clenched the wheel, anger and fear boiling in my chest. "I didn't let you fall. I tried, Marty." "You didn't try hard enough." The road twisted again, sharper this time, and I could barely see the guardrail through the fog. But I kept driving, adrenaline coursing through me as Marty's voice echoed in my head. Suddenly, Pete's voice cut through the chaos. "Red, you gotta snap out of it. This isn't real." "It's the mountains messing with you," I snapped back. "Messing with me. Don't act like you don't hear him, Pete." Pete didn't answer. The road ahead dipped sharply, and I saw it. The same curve where Marty had gone over. The same stretch of road where his truck had disappeared into the canyon. My heart raced, my mind spinning. Was that where this was leading? Was I about to relive Marty's crash? "Marty, I'm sorry," I whispered, gripping the wheel tighter as the road curved dangerously toward the edge. "I'm so damn sorry." The fog lifted just enough for me to see what was ahead. Marty's truck in the middle of the road blocking the pass. There was no time to stop, no time to think. I swerved hard, avoiding the ghost truck at the last second. My rig skidded. The the wheels screeching as I fought to keep control. For a moment, I thought I was going over the edge. The wheels teetered on the lip of the canyon, the guardrail creaking under the weight of the truck. But I yanked the wheel, pulling the rig back onto solid ground. My breath came in ragged gasps. I looked in the rearview mirror. The ghost truck was gone. The fog was clearing, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. "Red?" Pete's voice came over the radio, softer now. "You still with us?" "Yeah," I whispered, gripping the wheel with trembling hands. "I'm still here." The mountain stretched ahead, empty and quiet, but I could still hear Marty's voice in the back of my mind, and I knew in some way he'd always be with me. We made it through the pass just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting a pale light over the jagged peaks. The road ahead was clear, but I knew I'd never forget the night I'd faced Marty's ghost. My name is Wisteria Perez. I was 31 years old when it happened. I don't tell this story because I want to. I tell it because I need to. People need to know what's out there, what's hiding in the places the maps call wild and empty. I used to think nothing scared me. I don't think that anymore. It was supposed to be a week-long RV trip through Florida's backwoods. Just me, my girlfriend Lisa, my best friend Tommy, and his buddy Trevor. We had planned it for months, an escape from the city, from our jobs, from reality. Tate's Hell State Forest sounded perfect, isolated, beautiful, untouched. A little too untouched, as we would soon learn. The trouble started before we even reached our campsite. We were deep in the forest when the RV jolted violently, throwing Lisa against the window. The sound of crunching metal and hissing air followed. I slammed on the brakes. "What the hell was that?" Tommy asked, his hands gripping the dashboard. I jumped out to check. The front tire was shredded, destroyed by a row of rusted nails hidden beneath a layer of leaves and mud. Someone had put them there. "This isn't normal," Lisa muttered, standing beside me. Her auburn hair clung to her face in the humid air, her green eyes scanning the trees like they were watching her back. "Who the hell booby traps a road? Poachers," Tommy guessed, "or just some wanting to mess with tourists?" Trevor, the quietest of us, crouched near the tire. "We're stuck." He wasn't wrong. We had no cell service, no spare, and no way to call for help. The nearest ranger station was a long, miserable hike away. I suggested we camp for the night and figure it out in the morning. Everyone agreed, though Lisa looked uneasy. That night, things got worse. It started with the noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving through the trees, but it wasn't. I heard whispers, low, breathy voices, laughter, the kind of laughter that didn't belong. "Did you hear that?" Lisa whispered, gripping my arm. "Yeah," I admitted. Tommy unzipped the tent. "The hell is out there?" Trevor was already up, staring into the darkness. "Footsteps," he murmured. "Barefoot." We found the prints in the morning. Large, human, but wrong. Too long, too narrow, like someone had been walking on the edges of their feet. They circled our campsite, never coming closer than a few yards. Then we found the doll. It was sitting on a log near the fire pit, a small, crude thing made of sticks and twine, its mouth sewn shut with what looked like human hair. Lisa refused to touch it. No, this is some Blair Witch." Trevor picked it up, inspecting the dark stains on its arms. Dried blood. We should have left then, but we didn't. We were arrogant. We thought we could handle it. That afternoon, Trevor went missing. He said he was going to take a leak and never came back. At first, we laughed it off, thinking he was messing with us. But when an hour passed, we started searching. We found his flashlight lying in the dirt, the lens cracked. His footprints stopped suddenly, like he had been lifted off the ground. Lisa wanted to leave. Tommy agreed. I told them we had to find Trevor first, and then he came back. It was just before sunset when he walked into camp. His clothes were dirty, his face blank. "Jesus, Trevor, where the hell have you been?" I demanded. "Got lost," he said. His voice was flat, wrong. Lisa grabbed my arm and whispered, "That's not Trevor." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. That night, I woke up to whispering. I rolled over and saw Trevor sitting outside the tent, his back to me, mumbling to something I couldn't see. "Trevor?" He turned his head slightly, but not all the way. "Go back to sleep." I didn't. In the morning, Lisa pulled me aside. "Something's wrong with him, Wisteria." "Yeah," I admitted, "but what do? We leave. Now." Before we could, Tommy went missing. We searched all day, shouting his name, finding nothing but broken branches and deep sunken footprints leading into the swamp. "He's gone," Lisa whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Then we heard the scream. It was distant but unmistakable. Tommy, he was alive. He was in trouble. Trevor turned to us, grinning for the first time in days. We should go after him. Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. Still, I grabbed a knife and a flashlight and Lisa followed. We ran toward the sound, deeper into the forest. The air grew thick with the stench of rot. Then we saw the pit. It was a deep hole, lined with sharpened sticks. Bones littered the bottom, human bones. And Tommy was there, bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror. Jesus. I jumped down, cutting the ropes around his wrists. "Who did this to you?" Before he could answer, something hit me. Hard. When I came to, Lisa was screaming. I was tied to a wooden post, my arms wrenched behind my back. Firelight flickered, revealing figures moving through the trees. Thin, half-naked men and women with hollow eyes and sharpened teeth. They grinned at me, their mouths smeared with blood. Cannibals. And standing among them, smiling like he belonged, was Trevor. "Trevor," I croaked. He crouched beside me. "You shouldn't have come looking for Tommy." I struggled, but the ropes were too tight. Lisa was tied next to me, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You were always the hero," Trevor whispered. "Always the one everyone looked up to. But out here, you're nothing." I spat at him. "You're insane." He wiped his face and smirked. "You'll see, soon enough." The cult leader approached, his face covered in scars. He muttered something in a language I didn't recognize, then pointed at Lisa. Two men grabbed her. She screamed. I thrashed against my restraints. "No, take me instead." Trevor leaned in. "That's not how this works." I did the only thing I could. I bit down on the rope, sawing at it with my teeth. The fibers tore against my tongue. Then I heard Lisa cry out in pain. I snapped. With a final yank, the rope gave. I ripped my arms free and grabbed a burning log from the fire. I swung it into the nearest cannibal's face, the heat peeling skin from bone. Lisa kicked the man holding her. I grabbed a knife from the ground and cut her loose. Then we ran. The cult screamed behind us, their footsteps slamming against the dirt. I didn't look back. Somewhere in the chaos, Trevor shouted, "Wisteria, wait!" I turned and saw him standing at the tree line, his face twisted in something like regret. "Please," he begged. "I didn't want this." Lisa raised the knife. I hesitated. Then I saw his smile flicker back. I stabbed him in the throat. We found the road just as a truck came around the bend. The driver nearly crashed, trying to avoid us. We never spoke to the police. There was nothing to find, no evidence, no bodies, only nightmares. And sometimes late at night, I think about Trevor, and I wonder if I really killed him. We thought we knew the Ozarks. Matt swore up and down that Mark Twain National Forest was a hidden gem. Untouched trails, beautiful vistas, perfect for a 3-day backpacking trip. He was always good at selling these kinds of trips, making it seem like a dream adventure. I believed him mostly because I loved him, but even then, as we parked the car at the trailhead and unloaded our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to be different. "Looks like we're in for some real wilderness this time," Kyle said, flashing a grin. He was already making jokes about getting lost and being eaten by cryptids. Classic Kyle, always trying to lighten the mood. I laughed it off, but something about the dense trees and the isolation made the joke sit heavy in my chest. The forest felt too quiet, too vast. Matt, as usual, was all business. He was adjusting his pack, double-checking the map on his phone. "We'll follow the GPS for most of the way," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "Should be easy, just a couple of tough climbs, but nothing we can't handle." I glanced at Sarah, who was tightening the straps on her hiking boots. She was always the tough one, competitive, never backing down from a challenge. I liked that about her, but sometimes it felt like she had something to prove, especially when Matt was around. I couldn't tell if it was admiration or rivalry. "Let's get moving," Matt called, waving us on. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." The first day went as expected. We hiked deeper into the forest, leaving behind the marked trails and venturing into the heart of the wilderness. The trees were taller here, their branches heavy with green, creating a canopy that let in only slivers of sunlight. It felt like the forest was swallowing us whole, but Matt pressed on, oblivious to the creeping unease that gnawed at me. That night, we set up camp by a small stream. The air was cooler than I expected, a bite of cold that sank into my bones as the sun set. Kyle's tent had a broken pole, something he hadn't noticed until we tried setting it up. He laughed it off, saying he'd just sleep in Sarah's tent, but Matt's frustration was clear. "Next time, check your gear before we leave," Matt snapped, his voice tight. "Relax, man, it's just a tent pole," Kyle said, but the tension between them simmered. I was too tired to deal with their bickering, so I busied myself with starting the fire. Dana, my girlfriend, snapped photos as always, capturing the last glimmers of daylight filtered through the trees. She looked peaceful behind the camera, but I could tell she felt it too, that sense that something was off. That night, we heard the first howl. It was distant at first, almost like the wind moving through the trees, but then it came again, low and deep, rising into a chilling wail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "What the hell was that?" Sarah muttered, her hand instinctively moving toward the hatchet strapped to her pack. Matt shrugged, trying to play it off. "Probably just a coyote or something. These woods are full of wildlife." But it didn't sound like any coyote I'd ever heard. I exchanged a glance with Dana, and she raised her eyebrows in that way she did when she didn't believe something. Kyle, of course, took the opportunity to joke. "Sounds like Bigfoot's out there, or maybe the Ozark Howler," he said, his voice teasing. "You guys know that one, right? Big hairy creature, glowing red eyes, hunts hikers for fun." "Knock it off," Matt said sharply. "It's just an animal. Get some sleep. We've got a long hike tomorrow." I tried to brush it off too, but lying in our tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig outside made my heart race. I must have drifted off at some point, but it was restless sleep. The next morning, Dana told me she'd seen something outside the tent, just for a second, but she was sure of it, red eyes. "I saw red eyes, Matt," she said softly. I laughed nervously, thinking she must have been half asleep. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," I said, though even I didn't believe it. I hadn't told anyone about the dreams I'd had, the sensation of being watched, hunted, like we were intruding on something that didn't want us there. Day 2 was worse. The forest grew denser, the path less defined, and the GPS signal flickered in and out. At one point, we lost it completely. Matt insisted he could still navigate using the map, but the landscape wasn't matching up with anything. The trees felt wrong, closer somehow, like they were moving in on us. The air grew colder, and the silence pressed down like a weight. "We're lost," Sarah said flatly, glaring at Matt. "We're not lost," he snapped back. "I know where we are." But he didn't. None of us did. That night we found claw marks on the trees, deep gouges, like something had raked through the bark with claws far larger than any animal should have. Dana's hands trembled as she took pictures, but Matt dismissed it. "Could be a bear," he said, though the unease in his voice was obvious. "That's not a bear," Kyle muttered, his earlier joking tone gone. He stared at the claw marks, his face pale. "This is messed up, man. Maybe we should turn back." "We're not turning back," Matt said, his voice rising. "We've come this far. We stick to the plan." The argument that followed was inevitable. Sarah sided with Kyle, saying we were unprepared and it wasn't worth the risk. Dana stayed quiet, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Matt, stubborn as ever, refused to admit we were in over our heads. We set up camp again that night, and the howling returned. This time it was closer, louder, the sound reverberating through the trees like something was circling us. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of those red eyes watching us from the darkness. In the morning, we found more signs, animal carcasses torn apart, strewn across the ground. Deer, mostly, their bodies mangled in ways that didn't make sense. No predator would kill like that, not for food. It was like something had ripped them apart for fun. Kyle was the first to voice what we were all thinking. "It's the howler, man. I'm telling you, this place is messed up." Matt, as always, refused to believe it. "It's just a predator, wolves maybe." "There are no wolves in the Ozarks," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Not anymore." We kept moving, but the howls followed us, louder, closer. By late afternoon, we knew we weren't alone. We were being hunted. It was just before dusk when we saw it. We stopped to rest, setting our packs down near a small clearing. That's when Dana froze, her camera slipping from her hands. "Matt," she whispered, "behind you." I turned just in time to see it step out of the trees, hulking, shadowy, with glowing red eyes that burned through the dim light. Its body was massive, covered in thick, dark fur, but its shape was wrong, twisted, like something caught between animal and something more. The howl that followed was like nothing I'd ever heard, a deep, guttural sound that shook me to my core. It didn't charge. It didn't attack. It just stood there, watching, as if daring us to move. We didn't. "What the hell is that?" Kyle's voice was barely a whisper, his face drained of color. "It's not real," Matt muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Dana grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "We have to go," she said, her voice trembling now. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, its red eyes glowing brighter. Then, with one last bone-chilling howl, it slipped back into the trees. We didn't wait to see if it would return. We packed up in record time and started moving fast. Too fast. The light was fading, and we were stumbling over roots and rocks, our breath coming in short, panicked gasps. That night, we didn't set up camp. We just kept walking, desperate to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. The howls continued, closer, always closer. When dawn finally broke, we stumbled upon an old ranger's cabin. Its roof caved in, the windows shattered. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We collapsed inside, too exhausted to keep going. For the first time in hours, the howling stopped. Matt stared at the floor, his face pale, his hands shaking. "It's not real," he whispered over and over again, like a broken record. But we knew better. We had heard it, seen it. The Ozark howler was real, and it had let us live, for now. As we sat in that ruined cabin, the forest watching, waiting, I realized we hadn't escaped. Not really. The howler was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. My name is Valencia Stevens, and this happened to me back in 2014 in Juneau, Alaska, when I thought I'd figured out the best way to escape the chaos of city life, buy a cabin off the grid, live like Thoreau, and grow an impressive beard. Turns out I'm not exactly a survivalist, and that beard never really came in. I'd been living in that cabin for about 2 months, wrestling with basic tasks like chopping wood without chopping my foot and getting a fire started without fumbling through half a box of matches. But I liked the solitude, until I started hearing the hum. It wasn't every night, just sporadically. A low, mechanical thrum that vibrated in my chest like a subwoofer cranked too high. At first, I thought it might be the wind against the peaks or some kind of machinery echoing from the city miles away. I even made a joke to myself. Maybe Sasquatch got a generator. That night, though, the hum became a roar. My cabin shook, not like an earthquake, but more like the structure itself was resonating. I stumbled outside, bare feet crunching on the frosty gravel, and that's when I saw it. Hovering over the tree line was something enormous, metallic, and, if I'm being honest, uglier than anything I'd ever imagined could fly. It wasn't sleek or aerodynamic, just a mass of haphazardly connected shapes glowing with what looked like molten gold veins running through their hulls. It didn't zip or glide. It hovered, pulsating as if deciding what to do next. And then it chose. A beam of light blasted down, not the kind that sweeps around like in old sci-fi movies, but sharp, focused, and immediate. Before I could duck or even think, I was in it, lifted clean off the ground like a rag doll. My first thought wasn't alien abduction. It was, this is the worst way to die. Barefoot. The next thing I knew, I was inside. It smelled sterile, but not in a hospital way, more like someone had scrubbed everything with ammonia and forgot to rinse. The walls pulsed faintly, that same molten glow I'd seen outside, tracing patterns that seemed to shift the more I stared. I wasn't alone. There were 2 of them. The closest alien stood about 8'2", shaped like someone had stretched a human silhouette until it was all wrong. Thin as a rake, its limbs too long, with elbows that bent backward like a praying mantis. Its skin was textured like polished onyx, shimmering faintly under the light. The face, or what I assumed was the face, had no features, just smooth blackness. It looked at me, or at least turned toward me, and a voice filled my head, clear as if someone were speaking directly into my brain. "Do not be alarmed. You are unharmed." "Yeah, I can see that," I blurted. Sarcasm apparently is my default even under threat of dissection. Nothing says unharmed like yanking someone out of their yard without consent. The alien tilted its head, almost like a dog hearing a strange noise, then spoke again. "You are a sample. Analysis is required. Sample? Buddy, I'm not an Amazon return. The other alien, slightly shorter but bulkier, with limbs like an insect's exoskeleton, approached, carrying something that looked a lot like a scalpel. If scalpels came in 3 parts and vibrated, it didn't even try for pleasantries. It pressed the blade to my shoulder and I howled, not in pain, at least not physical, but in a sound that ripped through my thoughts. They weren't cutting my flesh, they were cutting into my mind. Images flashed, moments I barely remembered. A spelling bee I won in 3rd grade, my first failed attempt to ask someone to prom, the time I accidentally set the toaster on fire trying to melt marshmallows. Each memory felt like it was being yanked out, examined, then tossed aside. "Stop it," I screamed, but my voice barely echoed in the chamber. The taller alien responded, "Your species' resilience is sufficient. Behavioral anomalies detected." "Behavioral anomalies?" I shouted. I cried during Homeward Bound. "That doesn't make me an anomaly." The shorter alien finally spoke, or at least communicated, but its tone was harsher, angrier, like static interrupting a bad signal. "You are defective. Others will replace." I didn't like the sound of replace. Before I could overthink it, I lunged, swiping at the shorter alien with pure, stupid adrenaline. My hand connected with its strange scalpel, sending it flying across the chamber. The taller alien responded instantly, extending its unnervingly long arms to pin me, except I wasn't having it. I twisted, bringing one knee up into what I prayed was its weak spot. It crumpled slightly but didn't let go. "You will not interfere," it declared, its voice pressing into my skull like a migraine. "Yeah? Watch me," I spat. The chamber shifted suddenly, lurching sideways as if the entire ship had been struck. Alarms blared, a sound more grating than any fire drill I'd ever suffered. The shorter alien hissed something incomprehensible, rushing toward a panel covered in glowing symbols. That's when I spotted them. Cages. Lining the wall behind me were dozens of transparent containers, each filled with human bodies, limp but breathing. Some were kids, others elderly, most somewhere in between. My stomach twisted. These weren't just samples, these were people. "Release them," I yelled, yanking against the taller alien's grip. It ignored me, focused on whatever crisis the ship was facing. The moment its grip slackened, I bolted toward the cages, searching for any way to open them. My hands fumbled against a panel covered in alien symbols, slapping buttons wildly. I must have hit the right one because the cages hissed open, and bodies started sliding out like they'd been spit up by the machine. Not all of them woke up. The ones that did stared at me, their eyes wide and unfocused, as if their minds hadn't fully reconnected to their bodies. One man, a middle-aged guy with a scraggly beard, grabbed my arm and muttered, "Where what?" "No time," I barked. "We're getting out of here." The shorter alien screeched, a sound so high-pitched it felt like my skull might split. It lunged toward us, but this time I was ready. Grabbing the closest thing I could, a chunk of metallic tubing, I swung it with everything I had. The impact sent the alien staggering backward, black ichor dripping from what I assumed was its arm. "Move," I shouted, shoving the freed captives toward what looked like an exit. The taller alien intercepted us, its limbs extending unnaturally to block the path. The shorter one was recovering, its vibrating blade back in hand. Desperation kicked in. I didn't have a plan, just raw panic and the kind of reckless courage that comes from having absolutely nothing to lose. I hurled the tubing at the taller alien, then dove toward the control panel where the shorter one had been working. Symbols glowed and flickered, and I jabbed at them, praying I wasn't about to blow us all to smithereens. The ship jolted violently, tilting us sideways. The shorter alien screeched again, its blades skittering across the floor. One of the freed captives, a wiry teenager, grabbed the weapon and drove it into the alien's chest. Black liquid sprayed. The creature collapsed, twitching. "Gross," the kid muttered, tossing the blade aside. The taller alien turned toward the chaos, like momentarily distracted. I seized the chance, slamming another button on the panel. A hatch opened behind us, revealing a tunnel of blinding white light. "Run!" I screamed. We dove through one by one, tumbling onto cold, rocky ground. Behind us, the ship shuddered, emitting a deafening hum before it shot skyward, vanishing into the night. We weren't alone. Bodies littered the forest clearing, some mangled beyond recognition, others eerily pristine. The survivors stared in stunned silence, the weight of what we had just escaped sinking in. Later, investigators swarmed the area, documenting the carnage. Autopsies revealed surgical scars and strange metallic implants in the deceased. Authorities claimed it was a cult gone wrong, a mass delusion fueled by hysteria. They didn't believe us. But I saw the symbols, the cages, the ichor-stained blade. And I know this. Whatever those things were, they weren't done collecting. I had been staring at the sinkhole for hours. The edges of the earth had crumbled away into a perfect jagged circle, leaving nothing but a gaping void beneath me. It was unnervingly symmetrical, as though the ground hadn't collapsed on its own, but had been carved out by something or someone. I crouched at the edge, carefully adjusting my geological scanner, but the equipment was giving me nothing but static. The readings were all over the place. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, tapping the scanner in frustration. I hadn't come all the way to Hollow Creek for faulty data. I took a deep breath and scanned the horizon. The thick pines loomed like sentinels around the campground, their pale light of late afternoon casting long shadows across the landscape. My RV sat parked a short distance away, looking small and vulnerable against the vast wilderness of Chugach National Forest. It was a beautiful place, no doubt. Quiet, remote, exactly what I needed to clear my head. But the silence had a weight to it, an unnatural stillness that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I was here on a solo trip, tasked with investigating the sudden appearance of several sinkholes that had been forming in the area. Geological instability was the theory, but something about the way these holes formed had raised red flags from the moment I arrived. The patterns were too precise, too deliberate. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Ethan, the local park ranger, and the closest thing to human contact I'd had in days. His voice crackled through the static as I picked up. "Hey Megan, how's it going out there?" "Not great," I admitted. "The equipment's glitching again, and these sinkholes, I don't know, they feel weird. Not like anything I've seen before." Ethan chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "Hollow Creek's always been strange. You wouldn't be the first to think something's off here." "What do you mean?" I asked, standing up and dusting off my jeans. "You ever hear the stories about this place? Locals believe the sinkholes are more than just geological shifts. They think there's something ancient beneath the earth. The indigenous people used to call it the land that breathes. They thought the earth here was alive, that it could swallow you whole if you weren't careful." I rolled my eyes, though the words stirred an uneasy feeling deep in my gut. "Sounds like folklore to me." "Maybe," Ethan said, his tone serious now. "But I'd be careful if I were you. These woods have a way of playing tricks on you. And the sinkholes, well, they've taken people before. People who didn't listen to the warnings." I didn't respond right away, staring down into the abyss of the sinkhole in front of me. I'd studied rocks and underground formations for most of my career, but nothing had prepared me for the unnerving stillness of this place. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "But I'm here to study geology, not ghosts." Ethan sighed. "Just don't go too deep, okay? Call if you need anything." I hung up and pocketed the phone, but the conversation lingered in my mind. The land that breathes. Superstition, I told myself. Just old stories. I turned back to the sinkhole. Something inside me itched to see what was beneath the surface, to understand what was causing the ground to shift in such a strange, unnatural way. The patterns in the rocks I had been studying weren't like any natural formation I'd seen before. There were spirals, perfectly etched into the stone, as though by design, not by nature. The deeper I looked, the more I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't meant to find. That night, the first signs of trouble came in the form of noise. A low, deep rumbling that vibrated through the ground like the hum of a giant, unseen machine. It started just as I was finishing dinner, sitting by the campfire. The sounds blended into the whispering wind at first, but then it grew louder, more distinct, like a deep pulse coming from below. I stood, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The stars were barely visible, shrouded in the thick clouds that seemed to roll in out of nowhere. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the trees. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps, something moving in the dark. "Ethan?" I called, my voice small against the vast silence. Nothing. I walked toward the sinkhole, my stomach knotting with every step, The rumbling grew louder, and as I reached the edge, I felt it, vibrations under my feet. The ground beneath me was shifting, alive. I shone my flashlight down into the hole, but the beam disappeared into the blackness, swallowed by the depths. I knelt, running my hand along the edge. The earth was soft, loose, as though it had only recently begun to settle after something had disturbed it. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. I scrambled backward, heart racing, just as a section of the earth collapsed, sending a cascade of dirt and rocks into the sinkhole. I fell onto my back, gasping for air, watching as the hole grew wider, deeper, like a hungry mouth devouring the ground. Adrenaline pumped through me as I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out of here. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a geological phenomenon. Something was moving beneath the surface, something massive. I rushed back to the RV, the flashlight beam bouncing erratically as I fumbled for the key. But as I reached the door, the ground shook again, harder this time. The sinkhole was growing fast. I had to leave now. But then a thought struck me. What if I was right? What if this was something no one had ever discovered before? If I could just capture proof? If I could document what was really happening here, my work would be revolutionary. I would be vindicated. My mind flashed back to the spirals in the rock, the patterns that had seemed too deliberate to be natural. There was something ancient beneath the earth, and I was so close. I grabbed my gear and rushed back to the edge of the sinkhole. My heart pounded in my chest as I descended carefully into the darkness, lowering myself into the opening. The air grew colder as I went deeper. The walls of the hole were damp and slick beneath my hands. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the bottom. The cavern was vast, much larger than I had anticipated. My flashlight illuminated jagged rock formations, but it was the carvings on the walls that caught my breath. Symbols, spirals etched deep into the stone. They were everywhere, ancient and deliberate. This wasn't just a natural formation. This was a structure, a temple of some kind, buried deep beneath the earth for centuries, maybe longer. I pulled out my camera, hands trembling, and began to record. But as I did, a low, resonating sound filled the cavern, a rhythmic pulse, like the beating of a massive heart. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, the ground shifting beneath my feet. And then from the shadows I heard it, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming from the deeper recesses of the cavern. Something was moving toward me. Something massive. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the stone walls. I backed away, slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever was in the darkness, it was getting closer. I could feel its presence, a weight in the air, a primal force that made my skin crawl. The footsteps stopped, and then a deep, guttural growl echoed through the cavern. I ran. I didn't look back. The ground trembled beneath me as I scrambled up the wall of the sinkhole, my hands slipping on the loose earth. The growling grew louder, closer, until I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck. I burst out of the sinkhole, gasping for air, and ran toward the RV. The ground shook violently, and as I reached the door, I glanced back. The sinkhole was collapsing in on itself, the earth swallowing it whole. But for a split second, I saw something massive, serpentine, rising from the depths before it disappeared into the darkness. I didn't wait. I threw open the door, started the engine, and sped away, leaving Hollow Creek behind me. By the time I reached the main road, my heart had finally begun to slow. I was alive. I had made it. But the images of that cavern, those symbols, haunted my mind. I had uncovered something ancient, something that wasn't meant to be found. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that should have stayed buried. Something that was still there, waiting beneath the earth. And I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't be going back. It was still dark when I arrived at Devil's Tower. The silhouette of the monolith rose above the horizon like a jagged alien structure. The first light of dawn barely touched the sky, but the outline was unmistakable. This place had always felt otherworldly, as if it didn't belong to the same earth the rest of us walked on. I parked the RV in the farthest corner of the campground, away from the few other visitors scattered throughout the park. I wanted isolation. Needed it, actually, after months of losing myself in work and failing to fix my crumbling marriage. I thought this trip might offer me some clarity. If nothing else, I had my research to keep me focused. Legends of Devil's Tower had fascinated me for years, but one in particular always stuck out: the legend of the Watcher. Native tribes in the region spoke of a spirit that guarded the tower, a being that offered ancient knowledge to those who sought it, but demanded a steep price in return. As a history professor obsessed with ancient folklore, I couldn't resist the lure of that story. I had come to Wyoming to dig deeper into those legends, hoping to uncover something, anything that might be hiding in the shadows of the tower. I stepped out of the RV, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. The towering spires of pine trees loomed around me, creating an unsettling sense of isolation. I unpacked my gear, set up camp, and grabbed my notebook. The plan was simple: hike around the base of the tower, take some notes, and maybe, just maybe, find something that would finally make all the pieces click. As I set out toward the trail that led to the tower, I passed an older man in a park ranger uniform, grizzled with deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were sharp, though alert in a way that made me feel like he saw more than the average person. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Morning," I replied, glancing briefly at his name tag. "Tom, you here for the sights or something else?" His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it. I hesitated. "Research, mostly. I'm looking into some of the old Native American stories about the tower." He nodded slowly, his gaze flicking toward Devil's Tower. "The Watcher, huh?" I stopped. I hadn't mentioned that specific legend. He chuckled softly. "Everyone comes looking for something, but you do well to leave the Watcher alone, son. Some things don't like being disturbed." I tried to brush off his warning with a nervous laugh. "You don't really believe that, do you, Tom?" He didn't smile. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Just be careful. People who go digging too deep around here sometimes find more than they bargain for." With that, he turned and walked back toward the ranger station, leaving me standing there with a pit forming in my stomach. I told myself it was just local superstition, the kind of thing park rangers said to spook tourists. But as I turned my eyes back to the tower, the weight of his words lingered. By midday, I was deep into my hike, circling the base of the tower, taking notes on the surrounding landscape. The towering rock formation loomed overhead, casting long shadows over the forest below. I felt dwarfed by it, like a child standing at the feet of a giant. That's when I noticed the eyes. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a glimmer of sunlight catching on something in the trees. But then I saw them again, faint, glowing orbs between the branches. They were high up, too high to be an animal, and they followed my every movement. I stopped walking, my heart pounding. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered there, watching. I wanted to dismiss them as some kind of wildlife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind them, something intelligent. Forcing myself to continue, I kept walking, occasionally glancing over my shoulder to see if the eyes were still there. They were always just far enough away to keep me wondering, but close enough that I could feel their presence. When I finally made it back to camp, the unease hadn't left me. I sat by the RV trying to write in my notebook, but my mind kept drifting back to the eyes and the trees, the way they'd followed me, never straying too far but never coming closer either. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the campground in shadow. The tower loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the purple sky. The fire I'd started crackled weakly, the flames flickering as if they too were uncertain about staying here. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I was a rational man, after all, a professor, a skeptic. But as the night wore on, that skepticism started to feel more like denial. The wind rustled through the trees and the fire guttered low. Then, just as the last light of the day faded, I heard it. A whistle. It started softly, almost like the wind, but it was too distinct, too deliberate. A single, drawn-out note that drifted through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood, scanning the darkness. The fire cast faint light around the camp. "Hello?" I called, though I wasn't sure what I expected to hear in return. The whistle came again, sharper this time, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam into the trees, but there was nothing, no movement, just the oppressive stillness of the forest. The whistling stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I sat back down, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the RV, every rustle of the trees made me bolt upright, expecting to see those glowing eyes or hear that eerie whistle again. I told myself it was just my imagination, just nerves from being out here alone. But the uneasy feeling stuck with me, settling deep in my bones. The next day, I set out again, hoping to shake the paranoia that had settled over me. I hadn't gone far when I ran into Julie, a solo traveler I'd briefly noticed the day before. She was standing at the edge of the trail, staring up at Devil's Tower, a strange look on her face. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said as I approached, though her tone didn't match her words. There was something off about the way she spoke, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. "Yeah," I replied. "I've been hiking around looking into the old legends. You know about the Watcher?" She turned to me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "The Watcher? You're looking for it?" I nodded, uneasy. "It's just research." Julie's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The Watcher doesn't like to be found. You know, it watches, but it doesn't want to be seen." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about her was wrong. She seemed too calm, too knowing. The way she stared at me made my skin crawl. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked back toward her campsite, leaving me standing there, heart pounding, for reasons I couldn't explain. That night, the whistling returned, louder this time, persistent. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight, eyes darting between the trees. The whistle circled the campsite, moving closer then further away, like it was testing me, toying with me. Then, just beyond the flickering light of the fire, I saw him. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing at the edge of the woods. His face was pale, hollow-eyed, and his mouth was pursed as the tuneless whistle drifted from his lips. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. The figure didn't answer. He just stood there, whistling that same eerie note. My chest tightened with a sudden surge of panic. I stumbled back toward the RV, tripping over a rock and falling to the ground. When I looked up, he was gone. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me. The sound of my breath was too loud in the confined space. The next morning, I found footprints around the campsite. Small indentations in the dirt, leading in circles around the fire. They hadn't been there before. On the final night, I couldn't take it anymore. The dreams of Devil's Tower had become unbearable. Nightmares of the stone, pulsing, breathing like a living thing. I dreamt of eyes, hundreds of them, watching me from the shadows, always watching. I had to go to the tower. I had to see it up close. I grabbed my gear and set out under the cover of darkness, the whistle guiding me, pulling me toward the monolith. The trees seemed to close in around me as I walked, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The stars above twisted and shifted, unfamiliar constellations blinking in and out of existence. As I neared the base of the tower, I saw her again. Julie, standing at the foot of the rock, her face pale and her smile too wide. "The Watcher is waiting," she whispered. "It's always been waiting." The whistle grew louder, piercing through my thoughts, driving me forward. I reached the tower, my hands trembling as I touched the cold stone. And then, out of the shadows, the Watcher appeared. It was a massive, shadowy figure, its body indistinguishable from the darkness, but its eyes glowing, burning orbs that stared into me, through me. It didn't speak with words, but its presence filled my mind, offering me ancient knowledge, secrets of the tower, of the universe, of myself. But the price, I could feel it gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The more I listened, the more I realized that accepting its offer would mean losing everything. My mind, my soul, everything that made me, me. I stumbled back, tearing myself away from the Watcher's gaze. The whistle reached a fever pitch, and I ran. The ground beneath me shifted and warped as the world collapsed around me. I barely made it back to the RV. When I crossed the threshold, the whistling stopped. The forest fell silent. I drove away as the first light of dawn touched the sky. The image of the Watcher's eyes burned into my mind. I knew I would never be the same. It was still dark when I arrived at Devil's Tower. The silhouette of the monolith rose above the horizon like a jagged alien structure. The first light of dawn barely touched the sky, but the outline was unmistakable. This place had always felt otherworldly, as if it didn't belong to the same earth the rest of us walked on. I parked the RV in the farthest corner of the campground, away from the few other visitors scattered throughout the park. I wanted isolation, needed it, actually, after months of losing myself in work and failing to fix my crumbling marriage. I thought this trip might offer me some clarity. If nothing else, I had my research to keep me focused. Legends of Devil's Tower had fascinated me for years, but one in particular always stuck out: the legend of the Watcher. Native tribes in the region spoke of a spirit that guarded the tower, a being that offered ancient knowledge to those who sought it, but demanded a steep price in return. As a history professor obsessed with ancient folklore, I couldn't resist the lure of that story. I had come to Wyoming to dig deeper into those legends, hoping to uncover something, anything, that might be hiding in the shadows of the tower. I stepped out of the RV, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. The towering spires of pine trees loomed around me, creating an unsettling sense of isolation. I unpacked my gear, set up camp, and grabbed my notebook. The plan was simple: hike around the base of the tower, take some notes, and maybe, just maybe, find something that would finally make all the pieces click. As I set out toward the trail that led to the tower, I passed an older man in a park ranger uniform, grizzled with deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were sharp, though, alert in a way that made me feel like he saw more than the average person. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Morning," I replied, glancing briefly at his name tag. "Tom, you here for the sights or something else?" His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it. I hesitated. "Research, mostly. I'm looking into some of the old Native American stories about the tower." He nodded slowly, his gaze flicking toward Devil's Tower. "The Watcher, huh?" I stopped. I hadn't mentioned that specific legend. He chuckled softly. "Everyone comes looking for something, but you do well to leave the Watcher alone, son. Some things don't like being disturbed." I tried to brush off his warning with a nervous laugh. "You don't really believe that, do you, Tom?" He didn't smile. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Just be careful. People who go digging too deep around here sometimes find more than they bargain for." With that, he turned and walked back toward the ranger station, leaving me standing there with a pit forming in my stomach. I told myself it was just local superstition, the kind of thing park rangers said to spook tourists. But as I turned my eyes back to the tower, the weight of his words lingered. By midday, I was deep into my hike, circling the base of the tower, taking notes on the surrounding landscape. The towering rock formation loomed overhead, casting long shadows over the forest below. I felt dwarfed by it, like a child standing at the feet of a giant. That's when I noticed the eyes. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a glimmer of sunlight catching on something in the trees. But then I saw them again, faint, glowing orbs between the branches. They were high up, too high to be an animal, and they followed my every movement. I stopped walking, my heart pounding. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered there, watching. I wanted to dismiss them as some kind of wildlife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind them, something intelligent. Forcing myself to continue, I kept walking, occasionally glancing over my shoulder to see if the eyes were still there. They were always just far enough away to keep me wondering, but close enough that I could feel their presence. When I finally made it back to camp, the unease hadn't left me. I sat by the RV, trying to write in my notebook, but my mind kept drifting back to the eyes and the trees, the way they'd followed me, never straying too far, but never coming closer either. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the campground in shadow. The tower loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the purple sky. The fire I'd started crackled weakly, the flames flickering as if they, too, were uncertain about staying here. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I was a rational man, after all, a professor, a skeptic. But as the night wore on, that skepticism started to feel more like denial. The wind rustled through the trees and the fire guttered low. Then, just as the last light of the day faded, I heard it. A whistle. It started softly, almost like the wind, but it was too distinct, too deliberate. A single, drawn-out note that drifted through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood, scanning the darkness. The fire cast faint light around the camp. "Hello?" I called, though I wasn't sure what I expected to hear in return. The whistle came again, sharper this time, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam into the trees, but there was nothing. No movement, just the oppressive stillness of the forest. The whistling stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I sat back down, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the RV, every rustle of the trees made me bolt upright, expecting to see those glowing eyes or hear that eerie whistle again. I told myself it was just my imagination, just nerves from being out here alone. But the uneasy feeling stuck with me, settling deep in my bones. The next day, I set out again, hoping to shake the paranoia that had settled over me. I hadn't gone far when I ran into Julie, a solo traveler I'd briefly noticed the day before. She was standing at the edge of the trail, staring up at Devil's Tower, a strange look on her face. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said as I approached, though her tone didn't match her words. There was something off about the way she spoke, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. "Yeah," I replied. "I've been hiking around, looking into the old legends. You know about the Watcher?" She turned to me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "The Watcher? You're looking for it?" I nodded, uneasy. "It's just research." Julie's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The Watcher doesn't like to be found. You know, it watches, but it doesn't want to be seen." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about her was wrong. She seemed too calm, too knowing. The way she stared at me made my skin crawl. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked back toward her campsite, leaving me standing there, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. That night, the whistling returned, louder this time, persistent. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight, eyes darting between the trees. The whistle circled the campsite, moving closer then further away, like it was testing me, toying with me. Then, just beyond the flickering light of the fire, I saw him. A figure, tall and gaunt, standing at the edge of the woods. His face was pale, hollow-eyed, and his mouth was pursed as the tuneless whistle drifted from his lips. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. The figure didn't answer. He just stood there, whistling that same eerie note. My chest tightened with a sudden surge of panic. I stumbled back toward the RV, tripping over a rock and falling to the ground. When I looked up, he was gone. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me. The sound of my breath was too loud in the confined space. The next morning, I found footprints around the campsite, small indentations in the dirt leading in circles around the fire. They hadn't been there before. On the final night, I couldn't take it anymore. The dreams of Devil's Tower had become unbearable. Nightmares of the stone pulsing, breathing like a living thing. I dreamt of eyes, hundreds of them, watching me from the shadows, always watching. I had to go to the tower. I had to see it up close. I grabbed my gear and set out under the cover of darkness, the whistle guiding me, pulling me toward the monolith. The trees seemed to close in around me as I walked, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The stars above twisted and shifted, unfamiliar constellations blinking in and out of existence. As I neared the base of the tower, I saw her again. Julie, standing at the foot of the rock, her face pale and her smile too wide. "The Watcher is waiting," she whispered. "It's always been waiting." The whistle grew louder, piercing through my thoughts, driving me forward. I reached the tower, my hands trembling as I touched the cold stone. And then, out of the shadows, the Watcher appeared. It was a massive, shadowy figure, its body indistinguishable from the darkness, but its eyes glowing, burning orbs that stared into me, through me. It didn't speak with words, but its presence filled my mind, offering me ancient knowledge, secrets of the tower, of the universe, of myself. But the price, I could feel it gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The more I listened, the more I realized that accepting its offer would mean losing everything. My mind, my soul, everything that made me, me. I stumbled back, tearing myself away from the Watcher's gaze. The whistle reached a fever pitch, and I ran. The ground beneath me shifted and warped as the world collapsed around me. I barely made it back to the RV. When I crossed the threshold, the whistling stopped. The forest fell silent. I drove away as the first light of dawn touched the sky. The image of the Watcher's eyes burned into my mind. I knew I would never be the same. The desert sky stretched endlessly above us, an oppressive canvas of blood red and darkening purples as the sun sank behind the jagged cliffs. The air grew colder with each passing minute, and the shadows, sharp and long, slowly swallowed the land. Karen sat in her favorite chair outside the RV, knitting something I couldn't quite make out. Maybe a scarf, maybe a blanket. The faint clink of her needles was the only sound, apart from the occasional rustle of dry brush in the cooling wind. I sipped my lukewarm coffee, watching as the horizon devoured the sun, the desert's heat sinking into the earth like a fading memory. This was our fourth stop in Utah, and the solitude of the remote RV park was a welcome respite after weeks on the road. But something about it, the silence, the isolation, felt wrong. The first time I noticed him, I thought he was just another traveler, another weary soul seeking the same peace we had found. His folding chair was stationed about 20 yards from our campsite, just outside the reach of the firelight. He sat unnervingly still, his back straight, hands resting casually on his knees. The flames flickered, casting strange shadows, but they never quite touched his face. All I could make out was the glint of teeth, a wide, too wide smile, frozen in place as if he were savoring a private joke. "Did you invite someone over?" I asked Karen, my voice a low murmur. She didn't look up from her knitting. "Nope. Why?" I nodded toward the figure. "Look." Karen followed my gaze. Her knitting needles stopped mid-click, a brief tension filling the air. "Strange," she murmured. "Think he's lost?" I stood up, unsure of what to make of the situation. His stillness was unsettling, like he wasn't quite real, like he was waiting. I raised a hand in greeting. "Hello there," I called. "Can we help you?" The man didn't respond. He didn't even move. His smile remained fixed, wide, like a grotesque mask that hadn't heard a joke in years. His head tilted slightly to one side, studying us, his eyes glimmering unnervingly in the dim light. The fire crackled and the wind sighed through the dry brush, but he remained motionless. "Maybe he doesn't speak English?" I suggested, trying to reason with myself. Karen shifted in her chair, uneasy. Maybe. But something about the scene felt off. His stillness was too deliberate, too unnatural. My stomach clenched, a primal unease spreading through me. I hesitated, then decided to let it go. He was probably just some eccentric camper. We retreated into the RV as the night deepened, locking the door behind us. A quick glance out the window before bed revealed the chair was empty. The man was gone. I tried to brush it off as nothing, just a strange moment in a strange place. The next evening, he was back. I spotted him just as the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the cliffs, his folding chair once again positioned just outside the reach of our fire's glow. He sat with that same unnerving posture, hands on his knees, that sickening grin plastered across his face. His clothes were an odd contrast to the desert, too clean, too fresh. Pale button-up shirt, slacks, like he didn't belong. Karen didn't need to look up. She had already noticed. "He's back," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Should we call someone?" I asked, the words feeling weak as soon as they left my mouth. Karen shook her head. "What would we say? Some guy smiling at us from a distance?" I was about to respond when I saw it. Her knife, frozen in midair, suspended like a warning. The tension in the air thickened, unspoken fear hanging between us. We sat in silence for the rest of dinner, glancing toward the window every few minutes. By the time we finished eating, the chair was empty again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something else was there, just beyond the edge of the light. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the darkness. The chair was still there, neatly folded as though he had packed up in a hurry. But there were no footprints in the sand, no trace of where he had gone. I grabbed the chair and brought it back to the RV, intending to leave it near the park office in the morning. But when Karen saw it inside, she insisted I leave it outside. Her unease was palpable, her eyes darting to the empty space where the man had been. On the third night, he was closer. I was tending the fire when I felt it. A creeping sensation at the back of my neck, like fingers brushing my skin. I turned, and there he was, no more than 10 feet away, his chair positioned just beyond the fire's reach. But this time, I could see his face clearly. His skin was pale, too pale, almost waxy, and his eyes, they were too large, the whites of his eyes gleaming sickly in the dim light. His smile stretched unnaturally wide, revealing a row of teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. He didn't blink. "Hey!" I shouted, the words breaking the oppressive silence. "What do you want?" There was no response, not even a twitch of movement. just that endless, unblinking smile. Karen stepped out behind me, her phone clutched in her shaking hand. "If you don't leave, we're calling the cops," she shouted. The man didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto mine, a chilling intensity there that froze my blood. My anger flared, overriding the fear crawling up my spine. I took a step toward him, gripping the fire poker tightly. "Get out of here," I demanded, my voice shaking. But before I could take another step, he was gone. It wasn't gradual. 1 second he was there, and the next, nothing. Just the empty chair. I stumbled back toward Karen, my hands trembling. "We're leaving," she said, her voice firm with a finality that matched the terror in her eyes. First thing in the morning. The morning couldn't come fast enough. We packed up in a frantic blur, the uneaten breakfast still sitting on the counter as we pulled out of the park. The road ahead was a long, winding stretch flanked by scrub and jagged rock. We both knew something was wrong, but we tried not to speak it. The chair was inside the RV when I found it, folded neatly in the kitchenette as if it had always been there. Karen screamed. She turned to me, panic written all over her face. "Where did it come from?" she gasped, her composure crumbling. I grabbed it without thinking and threw it out the door, the sound of metal clattering against rocks echoing in my ears. "Keep driving," I whispered, gripping her arm. "Don't stop, no matter what." We didn't stop, not until we saw him again. He stood in the middle of the road, illuminated by the RV's headlights. His figure was a silhouette against the darkened desert, and his smile was even wider, more predatory. His eyes glowed faintly in the night, reflecting the light with an almost unnatural gleam. Karen slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching in the dirt, the RV lurching to a stop just feet from where he stood. But he didn't move. "Go around him," I said, my voice cracking with the growing sense of dread. Karen's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "I can't. He'll run him over," I shouted. "Hit him if you have to." But it was too late. He was gone. The sound of footsteps above us made my heart stop. Slow, deliberate taps, fingers drumming against the roof. I grabbed the shotgun we kept under the bed, my pulse thundering in my ears. I swung open the door, aiming it at the roof, the night air thick with dread. The roof was empty. Then Karen screamed. I turned just in time to see the man, his face inches from hers, grinning, his smile far too wide, far too hungry. She scrambled back, but there was nowhere to go. I fired. The blast shattered the stillness, ringing in my ears, but when I looked again, he was gone. Karen was sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands. The smell of burnt gunpowder filled the RV, heavy and suffocating. The chair was back. It sat in the middle of the RV, unfolded and waiting, as if it had always been there, as if it were inviting us to sit. I threw it out again, slamming the door shut and locking it. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. He would come again. He always did. We drove through the night, the miles stretching out before us like an endless nightmare. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of him in the distance, standing by the roadside, perched on a boulder, reflected in the rearview mirror. He was always smiling. By dawn, we reached a small gas station, desperate for human contact. I stumbled out of the RV, babbling about what had happened, but the attendant barely looked up from his work. He listened in silence before speaking in a low, measured voice. "You're not the first," he said. "Folks see him around these parts every now and then. They call him the smiling stranger. No one knows what he is or what he wants, but once he notices you..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "What happens?" I demanded, my voice raw. The attendant shrugged, his face unreadable. "Most don't stick around long enough to find out." We didn't either. The RV sits abandoned now, somewhere along a dusty road in the Utah desert. I don't know where the chair ended up, and I don't care. We traded the open road for the safety of a cramped apartment, the windows locked and the curtains drawn tight. But at night, I still see him, in the shadows of the hallway, in the glint of a reflection that shouldn't be there. He's always smiling. And I know, deep down, that he's waiting. The fire crackled softly, sending sparks into the cool night air. I was finally enjoying my RV camping trip at the Rocky Mountain National Park after a grueling year of city life. The smell of pine trees and the distant hoot of an owl brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. My name is Kellen Burns, and I had set out on this solo trip to reconnect with nature and clear my head. I had parked my RV at a secluded spot by a serene lake, miles away from the nearest campground. It was perfect. Just me, the wilderness, and my thoughts. I spent the day hiking and fishing, relishing the solitude. By dusk, I had caught enough fish for dinner and settled by the fire to cook my meal. As I skewered the fish, I noticed movement in the distance. Through the dimming light, I saw a man walking toward my camp. He looked rough, with a scruffy beard and tattered clothes. His presence here was unexpected. This area was pretty isolated. "Hey there," he called out as he approached, his voice hoarse. "Evening," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly but cautious. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his eyes darting around as if checking for something. I hesitated. "Sure, I guess. Got some fish if you're hungry." He nodded appreciatively and sat down across the fire from me. As he warmed his hands, I handed him a stick with a fish. "What's your name?" I asked. "Braden," he said shortly. He didn't offer more information, and I didn't press. We ate in silence, the crackling fire filling the awkward void between us. After dinner, Braden seemed to relax a bit. He told me he had been hiking for days, got lost, and ran out of supplies. His story seemed plausible, but something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way his eyes never settled on one spot for too long, or the faint smell of alcohol on his breath. "Do you have a map?" he asked suddenly. "Yeah, in the RV," I replied. "I can get it for you." He stood up too quickly. "I'll come with you." Alarm bells went off in my head. I walked to the RV, opening the door and letting him follow. I rummaged through my backpack, pretending to look for the map while discreetly grabbing my hunting knife. I turned around to find Braden standing too close, his eyes fixated on me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. "Here," I said, handing him the map while keeping the knife hidden behind my back. He took the map, his fingers brushing against mine. His hands were callous and cold. "Thanks," he muttered, but he didn't look at the map. Instead, he looked at the knife in my hand. "What's that for?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Just a precaution," I replied evenly. "You can't be too careful out here." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Smart man." He walked out of the RV and I followed, keeping my distance. "It's late. You should probably get some rest," I suggested, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. He nodded and wandered back into the woods. I watched him disappear into the darkness before locking the RV door. I didn't sleep much that night, every sound outside making me jump. The next morning, I woke up to an eerie silence. The birds weren't singing, and the forest felt unnaturally still. I decided to pack up and leave. As I was about to start the RV, I noticed something off. My tires were slashed. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my backpack, loaded it with essentials, and set off on foot. I kept to the trails, hoping to reach the nearest ranger station by nightfall. After a couple of hours, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Braden, his face twisted in a sinister grin. "You're not going anywhere," he said, pulling out a rusty knife. Fear coursed through my veins, but I tried to stay calm. "What do you want?" He chuckled darkly. "You shouldn't have let me join you last night. Now it's too late." He lunged at me, and I barely managed to dodge. We grappled, rolling on the ground. He was stronger than he looked, and the knife slashed my arm. Pain seared through me, but adrenaline kept me fighting. I managed to kick him off and scrambled to my feet. I ran, my heart pounding, but he was fast. I could hear him closing in on me. Desperation gave me strength, and I pushed myself harder. Suddenly, I tripped over a root and fell hard, the wind knocked out of me. Braden was on me in seconds, his knife raised. In a last-ditch effort, I grabbed a rock and smashed it against his head. He staggered, blood pouring from the wound, but he didn't stop. I hit him again, harder this time, and he collapsed. I didn't wait to see if he was dead or just unconscious. I kept running until I saw the ranger station in the distance. I burst through the door, gasping for breath, blood dripping from my arm. The ranger, a burly man named Clint, jumped up. "What happened to you?" he asked. I quickly explained, and he grabbed his radio, calling for backup. Soon, a group of rangers arrived and followed me back to where Braden had attacked. He was gone, but the blood on the ground was evidence enough. They searched the area and found their makeshift campsite not far from mine. It was littered with stolen goods and a few missing person reports. Braden was a wanted man, a drifter suspected of several crimes in the area. The rangers patched me up and escorted me back to my RV. They promised to keep an eye out for Braden, but I knew it was unlikely they'd find him. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting for his next victim. I decided to cut my trip short and head home. I had come to the Rockies seeking peace, but I left with scars that would take a long time to heal. The wilderness, once my sanctuary, had become a place of terror, but I was alive, and that was what mattered. The lake was everything I hoped it would be. Perfectly still, its surface mirrored the towering evergreens and jagged volcanic rocks surrounding it. It was the kind of place that reminded me why I fell in love with geology in the first place. Raw, untouched by time, and utterly indifferent to human presence. It was also the kind of place where the quiet wrapped itself around you, leaving you alone with your thoughts. Exactly what I needed, or so I thought. I parked my RV in the small lot at the edge of the Deutz National Forest and set up my site overlooking the lake. I planned to spend a week collecting rock samples, hiking the trails, and maybe rediscovering the sense of purpose I'd lost over the years after losing my job and drifting aimlessly for months. I thought this trip might be the reset I needed, but from the moment I arrived, something felt off. That first night, I sat by the campfire staring out at the lake. The water reflected the moonlight like a sheet of glass, so still it almost felt wrong. Around midnight, I heard faint splashing like someone was wading in the water. I got up and scanned the shoreline, but there was no one there. Just the trees, dark and silent, pressing in around me. The next morning, I met Camila. I was walking along the shoreline, searching for rock formations to sample when I spotted her crouched near the water's edge. She was younger than me, mid-20s at most, with dark hair pulled into a loose braid and a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked up as I approached, smiling brightly. "You're not a ghost, are you?" she asked. "Not the last time I checked," I replied, raising an eyebrow. "Why?" She stood, dusting her hands off. "This lake has a reputation. People disappear here." "Disappear?" I echoed, trying not to sound skeptical. "Yep," she said, tapping her phone screen to show me a series of photos. They were grainy, zoomed-in shots of people standing near the lake, each of them with faint glowing marks on their skin. Everyone who's disappeared had one of these. "Looks like camera glare," I said, brushing it off. "You think this is real?" She shrugged. "That's what I'm here to find out. I'm Camila, by the way." "Neil," I said. "I'm just here for the geology." "Well, Neil," she said, giving me a conspiratorial grin. "Let me know if you notice anything unusual." That evening I did. It started with a burning sensation on my forearm, like I'd brushed against something hot. When I rolled up my sleeve, I saw it, a faint glowing mark etched into my skin. It looked like cracks in stone, branching out in jagged lines. I stared at it, my pulse quickening, and when I stepped closer to the lake, the mark grew brighter. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd brushed against something while hiking, maybe it was a trick of the light. But as the night wore on, the mark didn't fade. And when I looked out at the lake, I swore I saw faint shapes moving just beneath the surface. The next day, I found Camila at her campsite and showed her the mark. Her face paled, and for once she didn't look amused. "You need to stay away from the lake," she said, her voice low. "That's how it starts." "How what starts?" I asked, more annoyed than scared. "What's going on?" "The mark," she said. "It's like a connection. It pulls you closer to the water, and if you give in, you don't come back." I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh or admit it was a joke. She didn't. "My brother disappeared here 2 years ago," she continued, her voice trembling. "He had the mark too. I've been trying to figure out what happened ever since." I wanted to tell her she was crazy, but the mark on my arm still burned, and when I closed my eyes, I could hear faint whispers, soft and insistent, calling me back to the lake. By the third day, the mark had grown brighter, pulsing with light whenever I neared the water. At night, the whispers grew louder, filling the RV with a sound like wind rushing through cracks. The dreams were worse. I saw myself walking into the lake, surrounded by glowing figures with hollow eyes fixed on me. Camila insisted on investigating the lake together. She carried a jagged piece of volcanic glass around her neck, claiming it had protective properties. I didn't believe in talismans, but I was desperate enough not to argue. We followed the shoreline, finding abandoned campsites and strange carvings etched into the rocks, symbols that seemed to hum faintly, as if they were alive. My mark burned hotter the closer we got to the water, and I felt an almost physical pull toward the lake. "Neil, stop," Camila said, grabbing my arm. I hadn't even realized I'd taken a step into the shallows. The cold water lapped at my boots, and for a moment I thought I saw hands reaching up from the depths. That night, I couldn't resist the pull. The whispers grew deafening, calling my name over and over. I stumbled out of the RV, my legs moving as if on their own. The lake shimmered in the moonlight, its surface glowing faintly. I heard Camila shouting behind me, but her voice felt distant, drowned out by the melody of the whispers. I reached the water's edge, my reflection staring back at me. The mark on my arm blazed with light, and as I stepped into the water, I saw them, figures rising from the depths, their glowing forms distorted and wrong. "Neil, stop!" Camila's voice cut through the haze. She grabbed my arm and pressed the volcanic glass against the mark. Pain shot through me, sharp and blinding, and the mark dimmed. The figures in the water recoiled, their forms flickering like flames. The whispers turned into a roar, and the water churned violently. Camila dragged me back to the shore, her face pale but determined. "We have to end this together." We scattered volcanic ash along the shoreline and lit bundles of sage, the smoke curling into the night air. The lake's glow dimmed, and the whispers faded to a low murmur. But as we worked, I could feel the entity's anger, its presence pressing down on us like a weight. When we finished, the water stilled and the marks on our skin faded. The forest fell silent, and for the first time in days, the air felt lighter. The next morning, I packed up my RV, ready to leave. Camila stayed behind, determined to keep investigating the lake. I couldn't blame her. She still had questions, and maybe she'd find the answers she was looking for. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The lake was quiet, its surface unbroken, but as the trees swallowed the view, I thought I saw a faint glow beneath the water. Some things are better left untouched, but some marks never really fade. The Adder DX were everything we'd hoped for. Vast stretches of untouched wilderness, a pristine lake so still it seemed to hold the sky, and the kind of quiet you only find far from civilization. It was the perfect escape for our anniversary. The campsite we'd chosen was secluded, tucked deep into the woods with just enough space for our RV and a small fire pit. Abby and I spent our first day hiking trails that wound through towering pines, laughing as we chased each other along the rocky shore of the lake. By nightfall, we were huddled around the fire, toasting marshmallows and talking about the future. "This is perfect," Abby said, her head resting on my shoulder. "Just us and nature. No phones, no distractions, just the way it should be." I agreed, pulling her closer. The first night passed without incident, the steady chirp of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl lulling us to sleep. But by morning, something had changed. I was the first to notice the carvings. I stepped out of the RV into the cool morning air, a mug of coffee in hand, and froze. The side of the RV, pristine white when we'd parked it, was now marred with strange symbols. They were etched deep into the metal, a series of jagged lines and curves that seemed to writhe and shift in the early light. "Abby!" I called, my voice tight. She appeared in the doorway, her hair still mussed from sleep. "What's wrong?" I pointed to the marks and her eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" No idea. I ran my fingers over one of the carvings. The edges were impossibly precise, as if cut with a laser, but there was no sign of debris or shavings. It was as if the symbols had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. "Do you think it was kids?" Abby asked, her voice uncertain. "Maybe," I said, though the campsite was so remote it seemed unlikely anyone else was nearby. "I'll check the area." The woods around our campsite were eerily still. The usual rustle of leaves and chirping of birds was absent, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against my ears. I searched for tracks or signs of intruders but found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, not even an animal trail. When I returned, Abby was scrubbing at the carvings with a sponge, but the symbols wouldn't budge. "It's like they're part of the RV now," she said, frustrated. "We'll call someone when we get back," I said, trying to reassure her. "Maybe a body shop can buff them out." But deep down, I felt a growing unease. The carvings multiplied over the next few days. Every morning, new symbols appeared, snaking across the RV in intricate patterns. They covered the doors, the windows, even the tires. Abby and I tried everything, scraping, washing, even painting over them, but nothing worked. The marks reappeared within hours, sharper and more menacing each time. It wasn't just the carvings either. The forest seemed to turn against us. Animals that had once been curious now avoided our campsite entirely. A deer and her fawn we'd seen on our first day stayed on the far side of the lake, their movements jittery and anxious. Even the squirrels and birds kept their distance, their absence leaving the woods eerily quiet. By the third night, Abby was on edge. "We should leave," she said, her voice trembling. "Something's not right." "We'll leave tomorrow," I promised. "First thing." That night, I woke to the sound of scratching. It was faint at first, like the whisper of branches against the RV's metal shell. But as I lay there holding my breath, it grew louder, more deliberate. It was coming from the roof. I shook Abby awake, and we both listened in silence as the sound moved slow and purposeful from one side of the RV to the other. "What is that?" Abby whispered. I grabbed the flashlight from the bedside table and crept to the door. My hand hesitated on the latch, my heart hammering in my chest. I swung the door open and shone the light into the darkness. Nothing. The scratching stopped and the forest was still again. But when I turned back to the RV, I saw it, a fresh set of symbols carved into the roof, dripping with a dark, tar-like substance. The carvings began to appear on us. It started with Abby. She came out of the shower one morning, her face pale, and pulled up her sleeve to reveal a symbol etched into her forearm. The lines were faint but unmistakable, as if they'd been burned into her skin. "It doesn't hurt," she said, her voice trembling. "But I can feel it, like it's under my skin." I checked myself in the mirror and found the same mark on the back of my neck. The sight of it made my stomach churn. "We're leaving," I said, my voice firm. We packed in record time, throwing our belongings into bags without bothering to fold or organize. As we started the RV's engine, the carvings seemed to pulse, their lines glowing faintly in the dim light. The forest itself seemed to resist our escape. The narrow dirt road that had brought us to the campsite now felt endless, the trees closing in on either side. Shadows flitted between the pines just beyond the reach of the headlights. I pressed the gas pedal harder, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. Then the engine stalled. We sat in the dark, the RV dead and silent. I tried the ignition again and again, but it was no use. "What do we do now?" Abby asked, her voice breaking. Before I could answer, the scratching returned, this time from all sides. The sound was deafening, a chorus of claws and whispers that surrounded us. The RV rocked slightly as if something heavy was circling it. Then came the voice. It was low and guttural, speaking a language I couldn't understand. The words seemed to vibrate in my chest, filling me with a primal dread. Abby clung to me, her nails digging into my arm. Through the windshield, I saw a movement. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, emaciated form with skin like bark and eyes that glowed like embers. It moved with unnatural grace, its limbs too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. Symbols like the ones on the RV were etched into its body, glowing faintly. "It's marking us for something," Abby whispered. The figure raised one clawed hand, and the symbols on the RV flared to life, their glow casting the interior in a sickly green light. I felt a searing pain on my neck as the mark burned brighter, and Abby cried out, clutching her arm. "The lake!" The thought came unbidden, but it was as if the forest itself had planted it in my mind. The lake was the key. "Come on," I shouted, grabbing Abby's hand. We flung the door open and ran. The spirit's guttural voice rose in anger behind us. The forest seemed alive, branches clawing at our clothes and roots trying to trip us, but we pushed through. The lake shimmered ahead, its surface unnaturally calm. I pulled Abby to the edge. The spirit's glowing eyes burned through the trees behind us. "What do we do?" she cried. I looked down at the water and saw our reflections, distorted but clear. The symbols on our bodies glowed faintly in the mirrored surface, their lines pulsing in rhythm with the spirit's approach. "The reflection," I said. "It's connected to the marks." I grabbed a stick and traced one of the symbols in the water, watching as the ripples distorted its shape. The spirit let out a guttural scream, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Help me," I shouted to Abby. Together, we dragged sticks through the water, disrupting the symbols in our reflections. Each stroke seemed to weaken the spirit, its form growing more unstable, its voice more frantic. Finally, I plunged both hands into the lake and swirled the water violently, erasing the last of the marks. The spirit let out one final, ear-splitting roar before vanishing into the darkness. The forest fell silent. We didn't speak as we returned to the RV. The carvings were gone and the engines started on the first try. We drove through the night, not daring to stop until we were miles away. But as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, I caught a glimpse of something in the side mirror, the faint outline of a symbol etched into the rear of the RV, pulsing softly in the morning light. The marks weren't gone. Not entirely. The wind was my only audience, and the dunes stretched out like waves frozen in time. I came here for inspiration, for a spark. For months, I'd been chasing silence in all the wrong places, hoping it would let the music come back, but silence never came. Instead, there was a void gnawing at me, like a predator waiting to pounce. The great sand dunes seemed like the perfect escape, vast, desolate, untouched. And the idea of the singing sands, that was the hook. I told myself the sound would help. Maybe the hum of the dunes could shake loose whatever was stuck inside me. Maybe I could write again. That's how I ended up in an overheated RV at the edge of a sea of sand, the mountains towering behind me like guardians that didn't care. The first night, the hum began. At first, I thought it was the wind, scraping over the dunes. But then it deepened. A low, resonant note that seemed to come from the earth itself. It wasn't random either. It pulsed like the rhythm of a heartbeat. I stepped outside, barefoot in the cool sand, and listened. The sound wrapped around me, almost tangible, filling the air with something I couldn't name. It was beautiful, but there was an edge to it, a dissonance that made my skin crawl. The next morning I met Sammy. He was perched on a rock near the visitor center, a skinny kid in a Too Big Park volunteer vest. He waved as I approached, his smile as bright as the sun glaring off the dunes. "First time here?" he asked, hopping down to meet me. "Yeah," I said, glancing at the ridge behind him. "I heard about the singing sands. Thought I'd check it out." Sammy's grin faded. "You heard the hum last night?" I nodded. "It's something else." His eyes darted toward the dunes, and he lowered his voice. "You didn't follow it, did you?" I frowned. "Follow it? No. Why?" His hands fidgeted with the edge of his vest. "It gets louder if you do. Louder and different." "Different how?" He shrugged, his shoulders rising and falling in a way that felt rehearsed. "It just does. Anyway, stick to the main trails. People get lost out there." "Thanks for the tip," I said, already walking away. Something about the way he avoided my gaze unsettled me. That evening, the hum came back. This time, it wasn't just sound, it was a melody. Faint, just on the edge of hearing, but unmistakable. It was the kind of tune that sank its teeth into your mind, refusing to let go. I grabbed my recorder, pressing it to the open window. But when I played it back, all I heard was static. Frustrated, I went outside carrying my guitar. Maybe I could play along, find the harmony, and draw it out. But as I sat on the sand, my fingers froze. The hum had shifted again. It wasn't just random notes, it was familiar. The melody was one of mine, an old song I hadn't played in years. I stood, scanning the horizon. Who's out there? The dunes didn't answer, but the melody swirled around me, wrapping me in something cold and wrong. I retreated to the RV, locking the door behind me. The next morning, Sammy appeared at my campsite. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the side of the RV. I shook my head. "Something weird's going on." He nodded, his expression somber. "The dunes are strange. You should leave." "I can't," I said. "I need to know what's out there." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder like he was afraid someone might overhear. "The hum, it's not just sound. It's alive. It pulls you in, makes you forget why you came." I studied him, the shadows under his eyes, the way his fingers twitched against the metal siding. "You followed it, haven't you?" Sammy didn't answer. Instead, he said, "If you go out there, you'll find people. Wanderers, artists. They didn't leave. They can't." That night, I ignored his warning. The hum was louder now, undeniable. It called to me, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. I grabbed my flashlight and recorder and started walking, the cool sand shifting under my boots. The melody grew stronger with each step, leading me away from the familiar paths. The stars blazed above me, bright and cold, but they didn't light my way. The dunes rose and fell, endless and alien, until I wasn't sure which direction I'd come from. But the hum was there, guiding me. I stumbled into a hollow, the sand pressed flat and smooth like the surface of a frozen lake. The hum reached a crescendo, and then it stopped. The silence was deafening. That's when I saw them. Figures, half buried in the dunes, their faces pale and drawn. They moved slowly, aimlessly, like ghosts in a dream. One of them turned toward me, and I gasped. It was my face. I ran. The sand grabbed at my boots, the dunes shifting as if they were alive. The hum returned, louder and more chaotic, drowning out my thoughts. I tripped, falling hard, and when I looked up, she was there. The siren. She wasn't human, not really. Her form flickered, made of sand and wind, shifting with every breath. Her voice was the hum itself, resonant and irresistible. "You've come so far," she said, her voice a melody that wrapped around my mind. "Stay." I shook my head, struggling to my feet. "What are you?" She tilted her head, her face blurring into something almost familiar. "I am the song. I am what you seek." "No," I said, backing away. "I just wanted to hear it." "You've already heard it," she said, stepping closer, "and now it will be yours." Her voice grew sharper, her form stretching toward me. My head ached, the hum splitting into dissonant chords that tore through my mind. I fell to my knees, clutching my ears. "You'll stay," she whispered. "They always stay." Desperate, I reached for my guitar, slung over my back. My fingers fumbled on the strings, strumming a jumbled, discordant tune. The siren recoiled, her form rippling like a mirage. I played harder, finding a rhythm, a melody that clashed with her song. The hum faltered, breaking apart into fractured notes. The siren screamed, her voice splintering into the wind, and then she was gone. I stumbled back to the RV at dawn, exhausted and hollow. Sammy was waiting, his face pale. "You made it," he said, relief flooding his voice. I nodded, collapsing onto the steps. "She's real." "I know," he said quietly. "I told you." I didn't ask how he knew, didn't want to hear what it cost him. I packed up that morning, leaving the dunes behind. But the hum followed me. Sometimes late at night, I hear it again, faint and distant, pulling at the edges of my mind. And I wonder if I really escaped, or if she's just waiting for me to come back. The road to the campsite was far rougher than I'd anticipated. My RV groaned and shuddered as I steered it over the uneven dirt trail. The headlights cut jagged beams through the towering pines of Coconino National Forest, their shadows writhing unnaturally in the encroaching darkness. By the time I arrived, the sky was a deep bruise of indigo, stars pricking through like the faintest pinholes in fabric. I parked in a secluded clearing this far from the designated campgrounds, just as I wanted. Solitude. This was supposed to be my escape, the perfect trip to capture the Milky Way sprawled across the rocky plateaus. But as I stepped out of the RV, a suffocating stillness greeted me. No chirp of crickets, no rustle of leaves, just the occasional groan of the wind through the pines, carrying with it a strange, almost metallic scent. The silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed down on me, heavy and unnatural. I brushed the unease aside and set up my camera. That's when the first anomaly hit. My camera's battery, fully charged that morning, was already draining. Irritated, I swapped it for a spare, my hands trembling slightly in the cool air. As I tightened the tripod's mount, movement caught my eye, a flicker of a shadow where no shadow should have been. "Hello," I called out, my voice hollow in the oppressive stillness. The forest didn't respond. I forced myself to laugh, a dry, brittle sound, and turned back to my equipment. But the laugh died in my throat when a voice, low and steady, came from just behind me. "Nice spot you picked." I spun around, heart hammering. A man stood at the edge of the firelight, his wiry frame cloaked in shadows. He looked to be in his late 40s, his face weathered, his eyes glinting like chips of obsidian. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, stepping closer. His hands were stuffed casually in the pockets of a faded jacket. "Name's Caleb." I swallowed hard. "Ryan," I managed. "Didn't think anyone else camped this far out," he shrugged. "Not many do. This part of the forest has a reputation." "A reputation?" I echoed, trying to keep my voice steady. Caleb settled onto a rock near the fire, the flames casting eerie shadows across his gaunt features. "Stories," he said. "Old ones, about the Watchers." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "The Watchers?" His gaze flicked to the trees. "Guardians, some say. They don't take kindly to trespassers, unless..." His voice trailed off. "Unless what?" I prompted, my unease growing. He met my eyes, his expression grim. "Unless you show respect, you take something, you give something. That's the balance." Break it." He didn't finish, but his silence was more chilling than any words. That night, as I reviewed my photos by the fire, my unease grew into outright dread. In one of the shots, just beyond the tree line, a figure loomed, a tall, shadowy silhouette, motionless yet menacing. I flipped to the next photo, and the figure was closer, impossibly close. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but the woods were empty, or so they seemed. My heart thundered as I told myself it was a trick of the light, an artifact of the lens. But the feeling of being watched was undeniable, a crawling sensation that clung to my skin. The next day, I hiked the surrounding trails, hoping daylight would dispel the strange happenings of the night before. But the forest was wrong in the daylight too. The birds were silent. The wind carried whispers I couldn't quite make out. My compass spun aimlessly, and my phone screen was a blank, unresponsive void. And then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too close. "Caleb," I called out, but the name felt foreign in my mouth. No answer came. By the time I stumbled back to camp, the sun was sinking, the shadows pooling like spilled ink. Caleb was there again, crouched by my fire pit, poking at the embers. "You wandered," he said without looking up. "What do they want?" I demanded. He glanced up, his eyes hollow. "They're testing you," he said simply. "To see what you'll give. You've already taken something, their peace. Now they want balance." That night, the watchers emerged in full. They lingered at the edge of the firelight, their impossibly tall forms flickering like smoke given life. They didn't move, but their presence was suffocating, their intent palpable. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of the words. The fire dimmed and the watchers pressed closer. A realization clawed its way into my mind. Desperate, I grabbed my camera, the prized possession that had brought me here, and hurled it into the flames. The plastic and metal hissed and spat as the fire consumed it. The watchers paused, their forms wavering, then retreated, dissolving into the forest as if they'd never been there. By dawn, I was gone, leaving the cursed clearing behind. A week later, when I developed the photos, one image froze me in place. The watchers stood in stark relief at the edge of the firelight, their forms darker than the night itself, and in the corner, Caleb stared directly into the lens, his face warped, his eyes two gaping voids. I never went back. Some things aren't meant to be disturbed, some debts can't be repaid. It was supposed to be a break from the suffocating grind of city life, a weekend of solitude, just me and my RV, nestled in the remote edges of Grand Teton National Park. The air was crisp, the sky a tapestry of stars, and the whisper of the woods felt like a lullaby meant only for me. My name is Nolan Drayton, and the wilderness has always been my sanctuary, a place to reset, to breathe. I had parked in a secluded clearing, surrounded by towering pines and firs, with a stream murmuring nearby. The silence was a balm, broken only by the crackle of the campfire I'd built. The first day passed in a haze of hikes, fishing, and relishing the absence of human noise. By the time night fell, I was cocooned in a serenity so profound it felt almost sacred. But the forest has its own rules, its own shadows, and I had no idea I was trespassing. The twig snapped behind me just as I was savoring the warmth of the fire. At first, I dismissed it. A deer, perhaps, or a raccoon curious about the intruder. But then came another snap, closer this time, and another. I turned, flashlight in hand, the beam slicing into the black. Nothing, just trees in the dark, waiting, an unease coiled in my chest, tightening with every rustle and crackle beyond the firelight. I smothered the flames and retreated to the RV, locking the door with a shaky hand. I double-checked every window, every latch, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in from all sides. The hours stretched. Every creak of the RV, every whisper of wind outside became a harbinger of something unseen. I had just started to drift into a fitful sleep when it began. A low, guttural breathing outside, impossibly close. It wasn't the heavy panting of an animal. It was deliberate, human. I froze, every nerve screaming as I strained to listen. The breathing stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I was just beginning to believe it was my imagination when a violent bang reverberated through the RV, shaking the walls. I fumbled for the flashlight, sweeping it across the window. My pale, terrified reflection stared back at me. No movement, no sign of life. The logical part of me screamed to stay put, to ride out the night, but the primal instinct to confront whatever was out there won. I armed myself with the hunting knife I always carried and stepped into the freezing dark. My flashlight's beam danced through the trees, illuminating nothing but shadows that seemed to mock me. "Need some help?" The voice came from nowhere, jagged and cold. I spun, the light finding a figure just beyond its reach. He stood motionless, a tangle of wild hair and ragged clothes that looked as if they'd been dragged through hell. His eyes gleamed, feral and hollow. "Who are you?" My voice cracked. "Just passing through," he said, his smile as crooked as his stance. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "Saw your fire, thought I'd say hello. Why were you banging on my RV?" "Wasn't me," he said, his tone dripping with amusement. "These woods, they play tricks on you." The way he stared made my skin crawl, as if he could see right through me. "You need to leave," I said, the knife trembling in my grip. He tilted his head, studying me like a predator sizing up prey. "All right then, guess I'll be on my way." He turned and melted into the darkness, but I didn't move until the cold bit through my skin. Back in the RV, I locked the door and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles ached. The hours dragged, my nerves fraying with every minute. Just as dawn teased the horizon, I let myself relax, if only for a moment. That's when his face appeared in the window. His eyes were wide and unhinged, his grin a grotesque rictus of madness. Before I could react, he smashed the glass with a rock, his arm reaching in, clawing for the lock. I slashed at him, the blade biting into his flesh. He howled, a guttural, inhuman sound, and stumbled back into the night. I didn't wait. Blood pounding in my ears, I started the RV and slammed on the gas, tearing through the narrow, twisting roads without a second glance. Hours later, I stumbled into a police station, trembling and clutching the bloodied knife. The officers listened with skepticism until they saw the shattered glass and the gash on my hand. They searched the area and found signs of him. Blood smears on the ground, the rock he used to break the window, but no body. Weeks later, they called with grim news. His remains were found deep in the woods, his body torn apart by an animal, or so they said. But I've seen predators before, and what they described didn't fit. Back in the city, I tried to move on, but the nightmares never left. His face at the window, his voice in the darkness, and the question that haunts me most, was he ever really gone? My RV trip to the Grand Canyon was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, an escape from the relentless grind of work and the chaos of family life. When my friend Marvin proposed taking his new RV on a trip, I leapt at the chance. Marvin's adventurous spirit always had a way of lightening my burdens, and the idea of disappearing into the wilderness for a few days was irresistible. Marvin arrived at dawn, his RV gleaming like a promise of freedom. It was fully stocked, fishing gear, a portable grill, enough food to last weeks, and of course, plenty of beer. Marvin even brought along his shotgun, just in case. The precaution felt excessive, but Marvin's reassuring grin dismissed my concerns. We reached the Grand Canyon by midday, the sprawling expanse of jagged cliffs and shadowed ravines stealing my breath. We parked in a secluded spot far from the throngs of tourists. It was perfect, quiet, serene, and utterly isolating. The first day passed uneventfully, filled with laughter, hikes, and a riverside barbecue. As the sun sank, painting the canyon in hues of fire, I felt a rare calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I let my guard down. The next morning, Marvin proposed an adventure. He had discovered a marked trail on an old map leading to an abandoned mining site deep within the canyon. The promise of hidden history intrigued us both. We packed the essentials, water, snacks, and flashlights, and began our descent. The trail was narrow and treacherous, with sharp drops that dared us to misstep. Marvin, always ahead, seemed unfazed, his boundless energy propelling him forward. The air was cool, the silence of the canyon broken only by the crunch of gravel underfoot. After hours of winding paths, we reached the site. The place was a ghostly relic of another era. Rusted machinery lay scattered like forgotten memories, and skeletal structures loomed against the canyon walls. Marvin explored with childlike enthusiasm, snapping photos and peering into broken-down shacks. I wandered away, my flashlight catching the glint of a small cave entrance hidden behind a cluster of rocks. "Marvin, come look at this," I called, shining the light into the cave. The beam illuminated a tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth. Marvin was beside me in an instant, his excitement infectious. "Let's go in," he said, already stepping forward. I hesitated, a primal unease prickling my skin. "Are you sure? It might not be stable." Marvin grinned. "What's life without a little risk? Besides, we've got flashlights. What's the worst that could happen?" Against my better judgment, I followed. The tunnel was damp and suffocating, the air heavy with the scent of earth and decay. We moved cautiously, the beams of our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Minutes stretched into eternity as the tunnel branched into a fork. Marvin chose the left path and we pressed on. That's when we heard it, a faint rhythmic sound echoing through the cave, like drumming. My pulse quickened, the unease now a gnawing fear. Marvin, ever curious, quickened his pace. I struggled to keep up, every step amplifying the sense that we were intruding. The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber. Our flashlights revealed a makeshift camp. Tattered blankets, rusted cans, and a fire pit long cold. At the far end of the chamber stood a figure, half hidden in the shadows. "Who's there?" Marvin called, his voice reverberating off the walls. The figure stepped forward. He was gaunt, his clothes tattered, and his eyes glinted with a manic energy. A slow, unsettling smile spread across his face. "Welcome," he rasped, his voice cracked and hollow. "I've been expecting you." Marvin and I exchanged a glance, confusion giving way to dread. "Who are you?" Marvin asked, taking a cautious step back. The man ignored the question, his smile stretching impossibly wide. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his tone gleeful. "Now you can't leave." Before we could react, he lunged at Marvin, a rusty knife gleaming in his hand. Marvin dodged, narrowly avoiding the blade, and reached for his shotgun. I scrambled to shine my flashlight into the man's eyes, the beam momentarily stunning him. "Stay back!" Marvin shouted, the shotgun trained on the man. The man froze, but his grin remained. "You think that will save you?" he hissed. "This place, it doesn't let anyone leave." The cavern seemed to close in, the air growing colder. I noticed the dark stains on the walls, the scattered bones half buried in the dirt. This wasn't just an abandoned site. It was a graveyard. "We need to go," I whispered, panic seizing me. Marvin nodded, his eyes never leaving the man as we edged toward the tunnel. The man didn't follow, but began to laugh, a sound that echoed unnaturally, as though the cave itself was mocking us. We ran blindly through the labyrinthine tunnels, the walls seeming to shift and press closer. The faint laughter followed us, a phantom that refused to be left behind. When we finally burst into the daylight, the sun felt like salvation. But we didn't stop running until we reached the RV. Inside, we locked the doors and collapsed, gasping for air. The silence was deafening, the horror of what we'd witnessed too immense for words. "What the hell was that?" I finally managed, my voice trembling. "I don't know," Marvin whispered, his face pale. "But we're not staying to find out." We left the Grand Canyon behind, the winding roads a blur. Neither of us spoke on the drive back, the memories too raw, too vivid. Even now, months later, the man's words haunt me. They found nothing, no camp, no man, just the endless, indifferent expanse of the canyon. But I can't forget the dark stains, the bones, the laughter that chased us through the tunnels. The Grand Canyon holds secrets, secrets that should never be disturbed, and some of us are lucky to escape its grasp. When I pulled into Blood Moon Campground, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, like the solitude I chased on these trips, but the kind of silence that makes you check over your shoulder more than once. The lake at the center of the clearing glistened under the fading light, perfectly still, like a polished mirror. The campground itself was nearly empty, just one other tent pitched a few sites away. I parked the RV near the lake, killing the engine. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air, but the stillness lingered heavy and unnatural. I chalked it up to nerves. After all, I'd picked this place for the view of the blood moon tonight. They said it would be the most vivid in decades. As I set up my chair by the water, I noticed someone approaching. A woman in her late 20s or so, wearing hiking boots and carrying a thermos. She waved. "Hey," she called out. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I said. "Tom," she said. "Abby," she replied, sitting on a nearby rock. "You here for the blood moon too?" "Yeah, supposed to be incredible." "You camping alone?" She nodded. "I've been on the road for weeks. Thought I'd stop here for the night, though honestly this place feels a little off. I raised an eyebrow. Off? Abby glanced toward the tree line. Too quiet, isn't it? No birds, no bugs, just nothing. I hadn't noticed until she pointed it out. The realization made my skin prickle, but I shrugged it off. It's the wilderness. Maybe nature's taken a nap. She didn't laugh. Just sipped her drink and stared out over the lake. The moon rose as night settled in, a brilliant crimson disk hanging low in the sky. I'd seen photos of lunar eclipses before, but this was something else. The moon glowed with an intensity that seemed to stain the entire campground red, its reflection shimmering on the still water. Abby had gone back to her tent, and I was alone again. I leaned back in my chair, letting the eerie beauty of the scene wash over me. That's when I noticed it. Strange carvings in the trees around the lake. They looked like crude runes etched deep into the bark. How had I missed them earlier? As I stood to take a closer look, the first whisper reached me. It was faint, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves, but there was no wind, and the sound wasn't coming from the trees, it was coming from the lake. I froze, scanning the water. A ripple moved across the surface, though nothing had disturbed it. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a faint red glow rising from the lake like embers floating in the dark. The glow grew brighter, coalescing into a figure, a ghostly silhouette with burning red eyes. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering in my ears. The figure hovered above the water, its gaze fixed on me. Then it smiled, its mouth twisting into a cruel mockery of a human expression. "Tom," it whispered. My name, barely more than a breath. I turned and ran. I burst into the RV, slamming the door behind me. My hands shook as I locked it, though I doubted a deadbolt would stop whatever that was. I grabbed a flashlight and my hunting knife, trying to steady my breathing. A knock on the door made me jump. "Tom, it's Abby," called a voice from outside. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then cracked the door open. Abby stood there, her face pale in the moonlight. "Did you see it?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "See what?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. I heard whispers and thought. Before she could finish, the whispers returned, louder this time, circling us. Abby's eyes widened as she turned toward the lake. "They're here," she whispered. We sat inside the RV as I tried to explain what I'd seen. Abby listened, her hands gripping her thermos tightly. When I described the glowing figure, she paled further. "I found this earlier," she said, pulling a weathered journal from her bag. The pages were brittle, filled with spidery handwriting. It was lying by the trail. "Look at the last entry." She flipped to the back and pointed. The writing was frantic, scrawled as if by a trembling hand. "The moon bleeds and they rise. They come for the guilty, for the broken. They come for us." "Who's they?" I asked. Abby opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, the RV lights flickered and went out. The whispers grew louder, accompanied by a faint tapping on the windows. I tightened my grip on the knife as Abby crept to the window and peeked out. "They're surrounding us," she whispered. Outside, more figures appeared, their glowing eyes piercing the darkness. They moved slowly, deliberately, their forms flickering like dying flames. The whispers grew louder, forming words now. "Join us. Let go. It's your fault." My stomach twisted. "We can't stay here," I said. Abby nodded. "There's an old historian in the town nearby, Caleb. He knows the stories about this place. He might know what to do." We waited for the figures to drift farther from the RV before making a run for it. The trek to Caleb's cabin was tense, the forest bathed in an unnatural red light. The whispers followed us, and every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of glowing eyes in the distance. When we reached the cabin, Caleb answered the door immediately, as if he'd been expecting us. He was an older man, his face lined with age and worry, but his eyes were sharp. "You brought them here," he said in a low voice. "They were already here," Abby shot back. "We need to know what's happening." Caleb led us inside and began to explain. The campground, he said, was the site of blood sacrifices centuries ago. The rituals had left a stain on the land, binding the spirits of the sacrifice to the blood moon. "They feed on guilt," Caleb said, his gaze piercing mine. "They'll use your past against you if you let them. They'll take you." Caleb told us there was only one way to stop the specters. The protective runes carved into the trees had to be restored. They were meant to trap the specters in the lake, but over time the symbols had faded, leaving the campground vulnerable. "You have until the moon sets," he said. If they're not bound by then, they'll take you and anyone else they can find. We split up to carve the runes, moving quickly through the forest. The specters grew more aggressive, their whispers cutting deeper. As I worked, I began to hear my brother's voice. Tom, you left me. You let me drown. I froze, my chest tightening. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But then I saw him, standing in the distance, his face pale and accusing. Why didn't you save me? He whispered. I dropped the knife, my breath coming in short gasps. The guilt I'd carried for years crashed over me, threatening to drown me. Tom? Abby's voice snapped me out of it. She grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the illusion. It's not real. Keep going. We reached the final tree just as the first rays of dawn began to creep over the horizon. I carved the last rune into the bark, the knife slipping in my trembling hand. As the symbol took shape, the whispers turned into screams. The specters gathered around the lake, their forms flickering violently. They let out one final piercing wail before vanishing into the water, leaving only silence behind. As the sun rose, the forest came alive again. Birds chirped, and the air felt lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Caleb was gone, leaving only his carved walking stick by the cabin door. Abby and I returned to the campground to consist being a ghost, shaken but alive. The lake was still again, its surface reflecting the morning sky. Do you think it's over? Abby asked. For now, I said, staring into the water. But deep down, I knew the blood moon would rise again.